Hello and welcome. I'm Tom Burges Watson. You're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya News headquarters. These are our top stories. The Israeli military carries out a massive airstrike on the Hezbollah headquarters in the southern suburbs of Beirut. Israeli television networks saying that the Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah was the target of that strike. Israel's aerial bombardment across Lebanon has resulted in the deaths of close to 800 people during the course of these last 5 days. And the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says his country is, quote, winning the war. He made those comments in his address to the UN General Assembly. Welcome to you. We begin with that breaking news from the southern suburbs of Beirut, where the headquarters of the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah has been hit by a massive airstrike. This happened in the last hour or so, and the explosion was so powerful, there are reports that it was felt 30 kilometers away. Well, since the start of this week, Israel has been carrying out airstrikes across Lebanon in a bid to put a stop to what's been more than 11 months of Hezbollah fire into its territory. Well, the death toll from these past 5 days there in Lebanon is reported to be close to 800. Well, for more analysis, I'm joined here in the studio by the editor of the Al Arabiya News channel, Wissam. Wissam, thank you very much indeed for coming to talk to us. What's the latest you're hearing?
Well, despite the fact that we are in front of a huge moment of truth for a whole nation, Lebanon, now the moments we are living now is to determine whether the leader of Hezbollah, the much talked about Hassan Nasrallah, is alive or he is safe. And the consequences of this has the potential to be enormous, not only for Lebanon, but for the region as a whole. So the latest is that we know the Israelis are saying he was in the building, according to sources on the ground, that the decision to target this building or this compound underground was taken immediately so that Hassan Nasrallah can be eliminated. And the thing is that we have 6 whole buildings that has been destroyed. We can think of a huge human cost for this operation. And some sources on the ground in the hospitals, they are saying that hospitals are not receiving any wounded people. It's like if all the people who have been hit, they kind of disappeared, because the kind of missile or bomb that was used, the MK-84, says some military experts, is the kind of bombs that was designed to target very deep bunkers like the likes of Tora Bora in Afghanistan.
Okay, so an explosion on a scale that we just haven't seen before there in Lebanon, something really out of the ordinary.
Never seen before, never seen before. Our sources on the ground, as like you said, 30 kilometers away, people in Beirut and other parts of Beirut, they felt a shaking that have never been felt before.
Lots of speculation, isn't there, about where Hassan Nasrallah is in ordinary times, especially right now, because, of course, was he or wasn't he in the compound when that explosion happened? I mean, it's a very well-kept secret, isn't it, where Hassan Nasrallah actually is based. Some people say he's not even in Lebanon.
I was one of those people who believed that this target is too precious for the Iranians to keep him in Lebanon. After 2006, he was barely seen very, very few times. And when 2006 war ended, he said that I kept on being in my apartment on the 4th floor in the southern suburb of Beirut, never left my place. That's what he said. Now, I doubt very much that, he's in such a place. And many were feeling that he's not even in Lebanon.
And when that explosion happened an hour or so ago, funerals were taking place in that same part in Beirut, Bahia, I think it's called.
Yes.
And those funerals were for Hezbollah militants who'd been killed during the course of the last few days. And when we look at what's happened to Hezbollah during the last 10 days or so, the pagers, the walkie-talkies, these targeted strikes, they've been really severely weakened, haven't they?
Well, let's say that the Israelis have finally the enemies they were prepared for. And when the 7th of October happened in Gaza, they were facing a completely out-of-the-box incident. They were being told that these people are preparing for an attack from the south. They never believed it. They have always believed the attack will come from the north and from Hezbollah. And after 1 year now, they have finally the enemy they were prepared for. This is why they seem to know everything. They seem to be able to hit a target whenever they decide to hit it. They seem to have very deep knowledge into the security apparatus of Hezbollah. And this is why they are being... they have the upper hand, big hand. The Israelis have the upper hand. And this is why we can understand why Netanyahu is so reluctant to go into any kind of truce.
Okay, well, stay with us if you can, Wissam, because I'm just going to bring into the conversation Israel's former advisor and peace negotiator for Israel, Daniel Levy. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. Israeli television network saying the Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah was the target of that attack. I'm just wondering what you're hearing from where you are about this attack and the intelligence behind it.
Well, first of all, I think that the network of your sources are going to be well informed. You'll be making your own calculations. But if we step back, Israel is on stronger ground when one talking about intel, tech, and infiltration. And Hezbollah has clearly been infiltrated in ways that Hamas has not been. We saw what Israel failed to achieve, 11 months of attrition against Hamas, in terms of restoring this sense of the power, the mythological military status. It has to some extent achieved in Lebanon with a terrorist act, actually, with the beepers, a mass maiming event, and with what it is doing. But here's the thing. The ease with which the hubris kicks in, the overreach kicks in. One gets high on one's own supply, as one say. One drinks one's own Kool-Aid, and you think that you have the other side on their knees. There is a very big difference between degrading a movement and incapacitating a movement. And I would argue that we are in the throes of degradation, not incapacitation. The missiles will still hit Israel. Israel has far less of a resistance economy and other aspects of life, if you like. Israel is more fragile in that respect, and Israel cannot return its residents to the north if the missiles continue to come in. The other thing just we should all bear in mind is one hypes up leaders as being irreplaceable until they no longer exist and they are replaced. I don't know what the fate of any particular leader is at the moment. I don't know if any of us do. I think we might find out soon enough. But the idea that you remove that one person and that this is a strategic change to the whole equation is something that has been tried and tested and failed. It doesn't work that way.
Just hearing the Lebanese Prime Minister accuse Israel of waging what he's called a genocidal war there, and that reaction came in the aftermath of that attack in the southern suburbs of Beirut. Supposing Hassan Nasrallah was inside that building, I mean, is that the sort of development that could either trigger a massive escalation, or is it the sort of thing that could actually draw a line under this conflict, because Israel could then show to the Israeli Prime Minister could show the people that we've achieved something, a mission accomplished, and would that be the end of it, or do you see this the opposite happening in an escalation?
Look, anyone who thinks that Netanyahu wants to bring this to a close and that whether ideologically or politically he is happier outside of wartime is not paying attention. The ideology, the personal politics, the coalition politics in Israel all align, and they align towards open-ended war. Now, what the Lebanese Prime Minister said is important in the context of what Prime Minister Netanyahu said earlier today. He claimed, we're not against the Lebanese civilians, this isn't about you, but he said the following. He said there is a missile in every kitchen, a rocket in every garage. That's exactly the same justification that was used to obliterate Gaza, to go disproportionately against the civilian population, to do what is being accurately, I think, called a genocide. If there's a missile in every kitchen, then every home is a legitimate target. That is exactly the same language, and that is why I think there's a genuine legitimate concern The Dahiyya doctrine, if you remember from 2006, this is when Israel devised this idea that you destroy whole civilian areas and that's okay. And America has allowed Israel to get away with this. I think if you flip the equation for a minute, where Israel begins to get bogged down is the missiles continue also in the opposite direction. The capacity to do that still exists. If that happens, and if Israel has walked itself up a ladder with its escalatory rhetoric, then the pressure builds for a ground incursion. If there is a ground incursion, then the dynamic shifts. Then it's Israel, I think, that sees that asymmetric warfare can be used against it. And that's when it gets bogged down. And that's the slope, the slippery slope we are on. I don't think it's too late to pull back from that, but I do think that's the direction we're traveling in.
It doesn't seem like Prime Minister Netanyahu is really listening to anybody, not his allies, not anybody. Who would he listen to?
Can I be a bit cheeky and flip the question and say, if someone told you don't do something and you went ahead and did it, and they showered you with gifts when you did it, and they went out in the United Nations, I'm flipping from you back to the politics of real life here. America sends the weapons, billions more guaranteed. America goes to the UN, provides diplomatic cover for Israel, puts out political plans. Israel embarrasses the Americans, rejects those plans, and yet America still sides with Israel, still joins Israel in the battle of narratives. There's no pressure. There's no American pressure. America is the indispensable participant in this war on Israel's side. It's not just Israel's war, it's America's war. And the interesting thing, and let me close by saying this, is Israel in these last months has shown how reliant it is on the US, but at the same time, it has embarrassed and therefore geopolitically weakened the US. And I would suggest that's not a smart place for it to be.
Yeah, and just building on what you're saying there, the US saying it didn't have any advanced warning of that Israeli strike. Thank you so much. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. Dan Levy, former Israeli peace negotiator. Thank you very much indeed. Here with me in the studio is the Al Arabiya editor, Wissam Keyrouz. Wissam, we're hearing from the Al Manar television network, which I believe is aligned to Hezbollah.
It's not aligned.
It's not aligned.
It's Hezbollah's mouthpiece.
Hezbollah's mouthpiece. Yeah. They are saying one person was killed, 50 others were injured in that attack. That sounds very difficult to believe when you see the size of the explosion. It seems almost incredulous.
Yeah, we are talking about 6 buildings, but we assume that a lot of people living there were not there because a lot of the people fled. And this HQ of Hezbollah is believed to be 14 floors under the ground, under the civilian buildings and infrastructure. So one dead seems, in any cases, a very, very weird, thing. But as I said, people who are there standing in front of hospitals, photographers, video men, they are saying we don't see any injured arriving, and this is very weird.
Indeed. And I just want to ask you, of course, Hassan Nasrallah and his group Hezbollah are not universally loved, are they, in Lebanon? No one's speaking out against them at the moment, but we know that behind the scenes, not every Lebanese person supports them. Were Hassan Nasrallah to have been killed, supposing he is killed, what would that change, and how would people react, do you think, in Lebanon?
Well, in every major war that Lebanon has faced, it was a challenge and it was a test for the nation. Lebanon is a nation of confessions, of religions. And to make it in very simple terms, in this war, you have the Shia population fleeing their homes and coming to seek refuge with the Christians and Sunnis and Druze. So Lebanon is happening again somehow in the wars. But there is a big problem with the fact that the war of Hezbollah is ideological, People, they are taking, for many of the people in Lebanon, especially the Shiite, for them it's resistance against Israel. But at the end of the day, Israel is not in Lebanon anymore. There is a place called the Sheba Farms who are for Lebanon, they are occupied. But also the fact that Hezbollah was saying our arsenal as a deterrent for Israel. So where is this deterrence now? Israel has been killing and bombarding and doing whatever it wants in Lebanon. So the very argument of deterrence has been obliterated. And this is why I said in the beginning of this talk, it's a big moment of truth. The people of Hezbollah will have now, even if Hassan Nasrallah is not dead, he is not dead, but probably a lot of the whole leadership is dead. And they are already dead in the many strikes that happened. It's a moment of truth. Will this, fact of taking Lebanon hostage of an agenda that is widely believed to be an Iranian agenda, will it hold after all what happened? Will there be enough resistance in the Lebanese political parties to change? And will it be enough for many of the Shiite people in Lebanon to join the others in taking a new way forward? I'm not very optimistic, honestly, but this has to happen. And otherwise, the worst case scenario is on the table, which is much more tension internally.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us, Wissam Keyrouz, editor of the Arabiya News channel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom.
Well, for more, we can speak now to a Middle Eastern analyst and director of the Institute of Political Science at St. Joseph University in Beirut, Sami Nader. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. There was this huge explosion, we've been talking about it here, targeting the Hezbollah headquarters in Beirut. As we've been saying, the like of which no one has ever seen there in Lebanon, at least not in recent times. Did you feel it?
Not only I felt it, however, I saw while I was going to the location I'm in here, I saw a column of smoke, several columns of smoke hovering over southern of Beirut, something unprecedented. Never seen, at least, never seen in Lebanon, not even since the war started on October 7, but even in 2006, we haven't seen any spectacle of that scale and a strike of that intensity. And now when we're looking how many buildings, that's been said, 6 buildings, totally flattened in one military strike, I mean, this is something that is of a different scale, of a different intensity, and definitely a dangerous turn in the course of the recent military developments.
Okay, we understand that one person was killed. That's what the Al-Manar news agency is saying. 50 people injured. That does sound, doesn't it, like on the low side, given the intensity of that explosion. And obviously, all the speculation at this stage is about who was inside that building that was struck. I mean, what are people saying at this stage?
I mean, people are still under shock, especially that some unconfirmed news that Mr. Nasrallah was the main target. So this, I mean, this, as you may guess, this is a very dangerous speculation, and this is a very dangerous turn, given the potential it has to propel not only Lebanon and Israel into full-blown war, but the whole region. Because if this is not a red line that has been crossed, what will be the red line? And if this is the case, this would, in my view, will drag Iran into the picture. Because if this is not enough for Iran to get involved, so what then is required for Iran to retaliate? Bearing in mind that when we're talking about Mr. Nasrallah, we're talking about the head of the pyramid of the most important asset Iran has in the region, because this would put at stake, I mean, the whole Iranian project in the region. And this is why I think this is a major turning point, and not to mention the repercussion inside Lebanon. Because already we're seeing, some provocation, some sectarian rifts in the country, and this actually does not bode well for Lebanon stability. Put aside, the impact of the war Israel is waging, the wave of displaced, the amount of disruption, all this is putting enormous pressure on Lebanon, especially that comes at a very critical moment where the economic situation is in dire state. Lebanon has been going through 4 consecutive crises for the last 4 years, starting with the economic and financial collapse in 2019, followed by the COVID thing, then the Beirut port blast that destroyed practically 1/3 of the capital, and then now we're into a war similar to that of 2006, not to mention the Syrian refugees problem, the spillover of the Syria war. All these crises are piling up and putting enormous amount of risk for Lebanon. The very idea of Lebanon is at stake. How Lebanon, we know how we went into this war, but I'm not sure how we will come out of it with a society that is very fractured, a very deep political divide, plus the dire economic situation we're going through.
Indeed. Just briefly for our viewers, the pictures we've been looking at while you've been speaking are in fact live pictures just coming into us here at Al Arabiya, showing what appears to be a rescue team on the scene where those 6 buildings collapsed just in the last hour and a half or so after being hit by an enormous explosion. It's understood that the Hezbollah Central Command, the Hezbollah Central Headquarters, was hit. And it's not clear who is inside. We're receiving mixed reports with regards to the safety of the head of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah. Various reports suggesting he's safe, and Israeli media saying he was the intended target of that. Sami, just coming back to you, this is the latest example of Hezbollah being dealt a very unexpected surprise. It began with the pagers, and there were the walkie-talkies, and we've had these targeted killings. Even as that explosion took place, funerals were being held there in Dahia for militants who'd been killed in the last couple of days. How seriously degraded or weakened would you say Hezbollah has been by these last few days?
I'm not a military expert, and I'm not sure about how, the impact or what remains from Hezbollah arsenal. But what I'm sure of as an observer, this is the most severe blow Hezbollah got since its very inception in the 80s. And as a politist or as an analyst, I would say that the real blow was a psychological blow. The blow Hezbollah has taken in terms of image. Keep in mind that this organization went out victorious in 2006, and it was hailed in all the Arab streets as the military organization who managed to defeat one of the strongest armies not in the region but in the world. And this excess of power, Hezbollah used inside Lebanon, but in the region, and it turned into one regional player. So the blow they took, rises today a lot of question about what remains of this image of invincible military organization about whether this organization still has the capability to keep on this escalation track, and about its ability to wage a full-blown war against Israel. Because they have been saying, Mr. Nasrallah has been saying that they don't want this war, but they are ready for it. And after this consecutive attacks on Hezbollah political and military commandments, what we have seen in terms of exposure of their own logistics system, of all their modus operandi, their operating system. I mean, this, raises some very serious questions.
Okay. Sami, I'm sorry to cut you short. We're out of time. We're going to have to move on. I'm really sorry, but really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Sami Nader at Saint Joseph University in Beirut. Thank you very much indeed. Well, we can cross now to two of our correspondents in the field. We've got Sarah Coates standing by for us in Tel Aviv, and in Beirut we've got Al Arabiya's news producer, Will Trafford. Will, let me start with you since you're in Beirut. Just tell us what you felt and how far away you are from Dahir, where that explosion took place.
Yeah, I didn't hear too much of what you asked there, but I guess it was around what we felt, and the best descriptors you could have: bone-chilling, blood-curdling. Locals you speak to here say that it hasn't been this bad. They haven't felt an explosion like that since the Hezbollah-Israel war in 2006. It was a really strange sort of environment because obviously we've had these explosions happening outside Beirut, and that's had nerves obviously in an elevated sort of state. This, of course, comes at 6:20 at night. When people are going home from work, they're going to the bars and the restaurants. And let me tell you, the bars and the restaurants now, they are absolutely empty. I was in my hotel room at the time. It lasted for about 40 seconds. Most people here would say it felt like an eternity, to be perfectly honest. We're hearing that there was around 20 projectiles that went into that supposed base, according to Israeli intelligence, in Hadek. It felt obviously a lot closer, everyone pouring out onto the streets, as you can imagine, everyone on their phones. That initial moment of terror, you know, the Israelis say they're coming to get the terrorists. You ask people here, you could ask who they felt was executing the terror. But as we sort of got onto the streets, that characteristic Lebanese spirit of the initial terror on the phones, asking if everyone's okay, to that sort of thing of supporting each other and kind of taking care of each other. So there is a little bit of heartening, but obviously devastating for so many of those people. We're now hearing 7, potentially 8 buildings have collapsed in the area.
Indeed. I mean, extraordinary explosion, incredibly powerful. And as we were saying earlier, I mean, hard to fathom that it was felt 30 kilometers away. Sarah, in Tel Aviv, let me cross to you. And I just want to know what people there are saying about what happened in Beirut this evening.
Hello there. Well, everyone I've spoken to is certainly aware about this. I'm talking aware of this, I should say. I'm talking about just your everyday person on the street. There certainly is a high level of worry after this latest strike in Dahir. And we have heard from the IDF Chief of Staff, Herzi Halevi. He's actually come out to say that there's a high level of readiness as Israel awaits a response from Hezbollah. So this is, of course, a major concern. We do understand that Israel was chasing Hassan Nasrallah, according to Reuters. He is alive, but once again, this is just yet another major escalation. And we also have a Pentagon statement just over the last few minutes coming out to say that the strike, there was no advanced warning of the strike from the Israelis to the Americans, saying that the Defence Minister, Yoav Gallant, that he spoke on the phone to the Secretary of Defence, Lloyd Austin, as the strike was ongoing. Now, what we can tell you is that the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, he was, of course, in New York. He'd only just addressed the UNGA just a couple of hours before this happened. He is now on his way back to Israel, or leaving very, very soon. And this is pretty unusual for an Israeli official to travel on Shabbat.
Indeed. And I just want to go back to Beirut and ask our producer, Will, who's there standing by for us. You were saying earlier you felt that explosion. It lasted, you said, 40 seconds. I mean, there have been explosions presumably throughout the course of the last day. Has that been a fairly regular occurrence during the course of the last day or two?
I think pretty early on, you knew the gravity of what this was. I've only been here a couple of days, right? And you hear the ricocheting of the weapons outside of Beirut in general. This was such a profound thump. And the instant thought is this near me? Where are we right now? Everyone is obviously jumping under tables and this kind of thing. So it was so clear that it was so different. And, you know, obviously I wasn't here in 2006. So you say to the locals, have you had anything like this? And they all say, not since 2006. It was so profound. And to sort of describe it, you almost feel like it's moving through your whole body. It is terrifying.
Yeah, it's extraordinary because while you've been we've been looking at rescuers on the scene in Dahya where that explosion happened, combing through the remains of 6 buildings, as you've been saying. And yet we're being told that only one person's confirmed to have been killed, 50 others injured. I mean, it doesn't really tally, does it, with the kind of explosion that you and others have described to us?
I think the other thing as well, right, is that, you know, Hezbollah, maybe they don't want to talk so quickly, right? Because obviously they're checking their facts as to what is going on before they make a statement. So the Israelis are saying, you know, Hassan Nasrallah is being the focus of the attack. I guess, obviously, as the day goes on, perhaps they will have the opportunity to get closer to those blast sites. It doesn't seem to tally, but obviously the scale of the devastation is such that recovering people in these kind of situations, it will be a longer than a shorter task.
Yeah, we've got Hezbollah announcing that a senior official by the name of Hashem Safieddine is in fact alive as well. So it's another senior figure, as well as Hassan Nasrallah, who we're being told is safe as well. So it doesn't sound, Sarah, as though perhaps the strike was successful from an Israeli point of view in neutralizing, for lack of a better word, the people that Israel would have liked to see killed in that explosion. Sarah, I'm not sure if you can hear us. I just was saying that it doesn't sound as though perhaps this was necessarily the mission accomplished that Israel might have wanted it to be, given that we're being told that senior figures from Hezbollah are indeed alive and well.
Yeah, certainly unclear at this hour as to whether these senior figures did survive or not. But what we do know, according to Israeli media, Hebrew media here in Israel, is that the Israeli military used bunker-busting bombs. These are very heavy bombs designed to really go down pretty deep. And as we've heard from the spokesperson of the IDF, he said that this was targeting a Hezbollah command centre. So still unclear as to if anyone from Hezbollah was actually killed in this strike. But other figures coming in, unverified figures, saying that right now 14 people have been identified as killed in this latest round of strikes in that southern suburb of Beirut, and this is just extremely, extremely concerning, especially once again, given that a number of pictures were also circulating on social media showing Benjamin Netanyahu purportedly in his hotel room in New York, ordering and sort of directing all of this just after he'd spoken at the UN General Assembly. Now, Israel once again has been really using this amplified rhetoric over these past few months. They've been saying that these attacks on Hezbollah will not stop, that Israel will continue going after these senior Hezbollah leaders, as we've really been seeing over these past few weeks. I think it was back in July, the first targeted strike, and that was on Fuad Shakur in Beirut. So this is really becoming a pretty regular pattern, but this time a major escalation.
Indeed, and as we've been saying with our other guests this evening, Israel has carried out a number of blows to Hezbollah during the course of the last 10 days or so, which began with the pagers, then there was the walkie-talkies, and now these targeted strikes. And Sarah, just staying with you for a moment, Israel's moved thousands of troops, we understand, to the border. Does it look likely from where you sit that Israel is indeed planning to go ahead with a ground invasion there in Lebanon?
Well, certainly there are ominous signs pointing that this could potentially be the next move. Israel's been, as we've seen, carrying out these very heavy strikes against what it says are Hezbollah targets in the south of Lebanon, also in the east, in the Bekaa Valley, over the course of the last week or so. So this is very, very troubling, given that these two additional reserve brigades have been called up to that northern border. We've seen many pictures coming in of tanks being moved up there, troops on the ground, boots on the ground. But in saying that, we have to remember that Israel, of course, does have the aerial advantage, the advantage from the sky, but it would be potentially a completely different story if it were to go in on the ground, given the capabilities of Hezbollah and the way that Hezbollah has really been able to train over, the last decade since the 2006 Second Lebanon War. We're talking about some 100,000 or so fighters. They're battle hardened, they're heavily armed, and they are ready. And that's what we've been hearing also from Hezbollah. So certainly this could be a turning point. This is a major, major concern. And once again, we are hearing from Israeli officials that they're basically preparing now for an escalation.
And Will, in Beirut, I just want to ask you for your perspective, if you can still hear me. Does it feel in Lebanon, are people saying it feels like we are in a situation where a ground invasion could be imminent?
I guess at this point, people are sometimes asking us that, right? They say to us, you're a Western journalist. They say things like, how is America, how is the United Kingdom allowing this to happen? Why are they funding these weapons? Why are they preparing to take expats out of Lebanon whilst they're providing these weapons to Israel? Our colleague Hadley Gamble spoke to Walid Jumblat a couple of days ago, right? And they were talking about this idea of a ground invasion by Israel. And he said, whilst there might be maybe some people, some factions in Lebanon that might welcome that to sort of take care of Hezbollah if you want, be careful what you wish for, because Israel, the Israelis have come here before and it hasn't gone well before. So if you're thinking it'll go well now, dream on.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. So thank you to Will Trafford in Beirut. Thank you as well to Sarah Coates. Great speaking to both of you. And thank you for bringing us the very latest on those developments in Lebanon and seen from Israel's perspective. Well, let's speak now to Hanin Ghadar, who is a senior fellow at the Washington Institute. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us at very short notice. I'd like to just start by asking for your perspectives and your reaction to this fast-moving situation in Lebanon.
Well, we don't know anything yet, right? So until we have an official statement by Hezbollah, which has been delayed, interestingly, we're not sure. Well, on the first level, on the news level, we still haven't had a confirmation. It's almost an hour or more after the news came out. If he is still alive, and if he was somewhere else and he's still alive, we would have heard immediately. We would have heard that he's still alive. He would have came up, spoke, or the official statement would have come earlier. The fact that it's delayed is very interesting in the sense that he could have been there. And if he could have been there, it means that it would be very, very surprising if he survived this blast. It's huge. And in any case, even if he survived, many others didn't. And on the other level, in terms of succession, let's take the scenario that he did not survive. In terms of succession, if others were him, the two possible successors of Hassan Nasrallah are Safiyuddin and Qasim. So in this case, if they were with him, they will have a serious succession problem. There will be no real leadership of Hezbollah. And if they survived and he didn't, then one of them would be the successor. And I wrote a succession paper a couple of years ago about Hezbollah system and how succession works. Hassan Nasrallah is still liked by some of his community because he is charismatic, and he's still linked to Hezbollah's golden days in terms of the achievements, in terms of the victories, the 2000 liberation, the 2006 quote-unquote divine victory. And Hezbollah is linked to that. Nasrallah is linked to these successes. Nasrallah carries with him the charisma and the history of Hezbollah's victories. The others do not, and the others cannot really talk in the same charismatic way that he is. And it will be very difficult for Hezbollah in terms of who's going to be the successor of Nasrallah. It's not easy to find someone charismatic like him and someone who has managed in the past to achieve victories for Hezbollah. It is exactly the same like Qasem Soleimani. Qasem Soleimani, when he was killed by the Trump administration in Iraq, it is true that the Quds Force and the IRGC is an institution, but it's also about the people. Qasem Soleimani was efficient. His successor is not. So that's why there was a lot of reshuffling of leadership and who takes what region and mission. And it weakened the Quds Force in the region, weakened Hezbollah in the same way, and shattered in a way the communication between the proxies of Iran. Nasrallah, if he is actually dead, this will bring further damage to the leadership, to the succession, and the next guy cannot really fill the shoes of Hassan Nasrallah in terms of charisma and in terms of his achievements for the party. So it is a big deal. The other question today is that if he is really dead, who is going to take the decision? Is it the IRGC, the Quds Force? Are the Iranians going to bring people into Lebanon to lead the dynamics of the war? Or is someone from Hezbollah suddenly will come out from the shadows and say, I am the guy? So there are so many questions.
Sure.
But the repercussions of his assassination would be huge for the party.
Yeah, indeed. And just to wrap up, we are hearing that Hashem Safieddine is in fact alive. That's what Hezbollah is saying. And the latest we're hearing from the Lebanese Health Ministry: 2 dead, 76 injured. That's according to the Lebanese Health Ministry. We're going to leave it there. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us. Hanin Ghadar, Senior Fellow at the Washington Institute. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Having me.
Well, that strike in Beirut came shortly after the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowed to continue targeting Hezbollah in Lebanon. He said this as he addressed world leaders at the UN General Assembly. Well, the delegations of a number of countries walked out as Netanyahu took the stage. While defying calls for ceasefires in either Lebanon or Gaza, Netanyahu vowed to carry on fighting on both fronts. Well, in his speech, he singled out Iran, saying Iran was to blame. Well, for more, we can cross now to Mitch McCann, who is our correspondent who's in New York covering this story for us. Just tell us a bit more about what happened there at the UN General Assembly today.
Well, good afternoon from New York. That's right. Benjamin Netanyahu arrived in New York and spoke at the General Assembly this morning. When he walked up to the lectern, there was actually applause from the Israeli delegation and from people in the public gallery who Netanyahu later identified as families of the October 7 hostages. There was so much applause that the General Assembly president had to call order 3 to 4 times to get people to sit back in their seats. But as you mentioned, at the same time, a number of delegates stood up and walked out of the hall, presumably in protest of Benjamin Netanyahu's speech. Now, that is a rare occurrence. We haven't seen that in the General Assembly in a number of years, so it is very rare, as I mentioned. And Benjamin Netanyahu started his speech by talking about some of the criticism that he had received from the international community at the UN this week. He said, I didn't intend to come here to New York this week. My country is fighting a war. But he said he did because of the lies and slander directed at Israel. And that really set the tone for what was a very energetic and defiant speech from Netanyahu at the UN.
Okay, Mitch McCann in New York, thank you very much indeed for that update. We're going to have to leave it there just to say that the UN Special Coordinator in Lebanon saying that all parties must urgently cease fire. So thanks to you, Mitch. That is all we have time for. Coming up next, we've got Riz Khan, and at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Please do join my colleague Rosanna Lockwood for Global News Today.
In a world driven by constant change, understanding the news has never been more essential.
At Al Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines, bringing you the stories that matter from every corner of the globe.
With trusted journalism and deep insights, we provide you with the context and analysis that help you see the full picture.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
And conversations with those shaping the future.
We deliver the knowledge and perspectives you need.
Al Arabiya News,
where knowledge
meets perspective.
Hello and welcome. I'm Riz Khan. This week, it's the family feud which became America's uncivil war. Uncle against nephew, Donald versus Fred, Trump versus Trump, and now Democrat versus Republican. Donald Trump's nephew, Fred III, talks to me about the assassination attempts, political violence, eating pets, why he's campaigning for Kamala Harris, and why he can never forgive his uncle's treatment of his disabled son.
I needed to talk to him about William, and he just said, he doesn't recognize you, let him die, and move to Florida.
And I'll speak with Hollywood's best bad guy, Danish actor Mads Mikkelsen, about safety on set and what really makes him Mads.
Back home in Denmark, I get to play all kind of different characters, variety of human beings. And yes, in America, there's a tendency, if you have a funny accent, that they will make you the baddie.
But we start with Fred Trump III. He's written a book titled All in the Family, The Trumps and How We Got This Way. He writes warmly about his father, Fred, who died at the age of 42 after suffering from alcoholism. And he says that's when the rift between the family became a chasm. Fred, great to have you on the show. Now, let's start by talking about your son, William. I'm a huge fan of the musician Peter Gabriel. I think that's something I share with both you and William. Tell me about that.
I hope Peter's listening, because when people say Genesis is my favorite band, I said, you have no idea what you're talking about, Genesis. Genesis is Peter Gabriel.
I will send him an email. Tell him.
Oh,
now,
please,
tell me about how because you talk about "Road to Joy" being William's favorite song.
Yeah, it really is. William, and thank you for asking. I really appreciate when people ask about William, he's really one of the reasons why I wrote this book. He's 25 years old. He is severely disabled, needs assistance with virtually everything he does. And we're blessed by having such great people that work with him on a daily basis. In fact, many of whom are Haitian. And I'm sure you've been following what's going on here in Springfield, Ohio. And I can just let people know the Haitian community is wonderful, and they are helping to make my son the young man he is. William loves many things, one of which is music. And when Peter came out with that song last year or earlier this year, he just loves it every time he hears it. It's he needs assistance again walking when he's out of his wheelchair, and that's one of the songs that he just loves walking to.
And I know, I'm listening to the audio version of your book, so I'm hearing you tell the story, and I realize how important family is to you specifically. And the thing is that Donald Trump, your uncle, his treatment of William was at the center of one of the most shocking moments in your book. So just tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, if I can quickly go back, if you don't mind, Riz.
Sure.
When Donald was elected, my wife reached out to my cousin Ivanka. We knew that this would be our opportunity to take our advocacy of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities to a new level. It culminated in a meeting in the White House, in the Oval Office, and Donald attended, which I very much appreciated. And we spent about 45 minutes going through the issues that were important to us. including ways that we could save money and yet get better services for the disabled. When the meeting ended, I was called back in to see Donald, and Alex Azar, the head of Health and Human Services, was in the room. And Donald says, "Hey, pal, how's it going?" And we chatted for a minute, and he said, "Those people, the costs, they should just die." I obviously really didn't know what to say, so I just said, "Thanks very much. I'll talk to you soon." 3 years later, I needed to talk to him about William, and he just said, "He doesn't recognize you. Let him die and move to Florida." Now, I don't know how one person could say that about another human being, least of all his grandnephew. And it's important to note that Donald had never asked to meet William and never has met William. So how he knows that my son wouldn't recognize me is beyond me. William certainly recognizes me, and he recognizes every person in his life.
And you know, Fred, that makes me wonder, as hurtful as that comment could it be something that Donald Trump might have said on the spur of the moment and perhaps even regretted afterwards? Or do you think it's more a reflection of an aspect to his character?
Oh, I think there's no regret. And when the book came out, there was, some releases from my cousin Eric and even Donald and the campaign. Not once did they acknowledge that comment. So he has no empathy whatsoever. And as you said, you've been listening to the audiobook, so you know how he treated my father. It just doesn't exist, whether it's family or it's not family.
And that's the thing that you describe how you're basically cut off financially. And I wonder what the financial impact of that family feud has been on your ability to care for William.
Well, we will get through it. And we have, as I said, some wonderful people in our lives that help take care of William. We look for, our state assistance financially for William and for all the disabled community. William is now in a group home. We work with an organization since William was in their Birth to 3 program. So again, he's 25 years old. So we rely on the state, as do, throughout the country, millions and millions of people. This is a very large community. And as I say, if I have a national stage, and frankly, apparently an international stage, I've been speaking to folks in Australia. I'll be talking at the Canberra Writers Festival in October, the UK, Canada, and it always comes up as such an important issue, the disability issue. So I'm out there doing what I can to, again, just to advocate on a group of people who, for the most part, is voiceless.
All right. We have a global reach, and I know that even here in the Middle East, that's become a much bigger issue that people are paying attention to now. I have to ask you, though, Fred, despite your differences, some would say family is family. And when a member of your family is the focus of not just 1, but 2 assassination attempts, how do you react?
Right. Well, I'll just say what hopefully everybody that has the opportunity to say and should think. There's no place for political violence in our country or in any country. So let's just get that out there. I was horrified when I heard about the first attempt. And several hours later, I reached out through Donald's assistant and put out a statement to her saying, "Lisa, my wife, and the kids, we are all thinking about him. We hope he's okay, and please pass along the message." And she got back to me pretty soon and said, "Will do." So, I was horrified by that.
Has carrying the Trump name ever made you the target of political violence? And has the book perhaps increased that risk?
When Donald first started running in earnest in 2015, when his first real policy, if you could call them prescriptions, were anti-immigrant. Now, we have a lot of folks, you may hear the lawn mowers going in the background, a large migrant community, legal migrant community in where I live. And we had dead animals thrown on our lawn. We had reporters coming to our house unannounced cars that would pull up in our driveway and then pull away, or stay at the end of the street and just, sit outside our property for, hours at a time. And that is really one of the reasons why I held back in writing the book, because William was still living at home at that time. My other two who are older, Andrea's and my older son, Christopher, they were in college at the time. And then as soon as they graduated, they both moved into the city. But William was here. So when he moved into the group home, and after January 6th, that's when I really said to myself, I've got to do something. And again, January 6th was just it should never, ever happen again. It should not have happened in the first place. And that's when someone asked me the other day, have you ever been embarrassed by your family name? And sure, there have been things in the past that, Donald's just kind of nuts. He just talks crazy talk. But this was dangerous. This was violent. And to me, that was an embarrassment for as people will say, my nuclear family.
In your book, you give a very clear description of your family history. It's very engaging, and a lot of it is about your father and the story of the Trump family through his eyes as well, which is very engaging, as I say. And I know you've dedicated your book to the memory of your father. Many people will, though, assume that the timing of its publication will be to perhaps even harm Donald Trump's campaign for re-election.
It wasn't the intent at all. I mean, this is unlike any other book written by anybody. This is just a truthful book, again, to honor my dad, who was a very caring and charismatic guy, and William, who is the bravest and inspirational person I know. And I figured I can't tell the story of those two without telling the story of the Trump family, complicated like every other family is, and sometimes cruel. And, Donald happens to be the central figure in the family. So he obviously played a large part in it. This is told, again, by somebody that's known him my entire life. Nobody has written a book with the personal stories, truthful stories that I've laid out.
Well, I was going to say the Trump name, of course, is constantly in the news now as we approach the election. And I wonder what you made of Donald Trump's debate with Kamala Harris. And there was a lot of focus on crowd sizes and immigrants eating pets and so on.
Yeah. The crowd size, he's always been that way, that it has to be. The joke when he was starting to, in earnest, build buildings in Manhattan, Trump Tower, he claims is 68 stories tall when it really is 46 stories tall. I was at the inauguration in 2017. I can assure you that was not the largest crowd that was ever seen at an inauguration. All the reports from respected news organizations had it right. It was not the largest crowd ever. As far as the cats and dogs thing, and this happens, you see it all the time. He will double and triple down. And, his sidekick, J.D. Vance, is doing it too. And I was interviewed on a local radio station in Atlanta, Georgia. I said, the word is out that Donald's going to go to Springfield. You know what? I'm going to go to Springfield, and I'm going to talk with the Haitian community and let them know my thoughts of how special they are, how hardworking they are.
Do you know, it's interesting you mentioned that, because you talked about that at the beginning, saying about Haitians and how valuable they've been in your life, especially with looking after William. There's been a backlash against the Haitian community as a result of Donald Trump's remarks. Do you think that he'd even know about that or worry about that?
Oh, he doesn't. He knows about it and he doesn't care. He just doesn't care. In fact, he will use them as props for now. It's just another group legally in this country, by the way, through a program set up by a Republican, George W. Bush. So those folks are legal. They're hardworking. And one of there are many disturbing parts. In fact, the entire Project 2025 is disturbing, is the ability that they will have to, I guess the word is, denaturalize people and send them back, not just to their country of origin, but to wherever they want to. Very sick, twisted thoughts.
There's a section also in the book where you're talking about the earlier years and you refer to Donald Trump using the N-word after his car was damaged. Were you trying to imply that perhaps he's racist?
I was implying that not just the fact that he used the word twice in my presence, but maybe the larger story is that he did not know who actually did it. So he just assumed it was black people doing it. Does that make him racist? I can't tell you whether he is or not. Lately, he's really been pressing it, and so is my cousin Donnie, which I am very sad to see them do this. They're hanging out with really bad people who spew racist profanities and beliefs, like this Laura Loomer lunatic. I don't know why he hangs out there, but his base eats it up and they love it, and they'll never change. You know, they will never change. They will follow him to the end.
Fred, I should say, of course, that Donald Trump's team has dismissed the book as a pack of lies and exaggerations intended to grab publicity. I'm wondering what sort of feedback you've had directly from your wider family, perhaps even Donald Trump.
Nothing personally. Nothing personally.
Now,
which I expect. I'm sorry.
All right, no, I apologize. I will say, you've announced your support for Kamala Harris. I mean, did you already have political differences with the Republicans, or is the appeal simply that Kamala Harris is not Donald Trump? And what do you fear the most from a second Trump presidency?
First of all, I'm a political junkie. I have followed politics, well, since I was an early kid, when my two early heroes, Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy, were assassinated. For me, it's always policy over politics. So I have always voted for Democrats, even if they don't go all the way to what I want or what I think is appropriate for either a city or a state or a national election. And I'm doing that now. The Harris campaign has the policies that I believe in. I think she is the person, and her administration will keep this country moving forward, because America is great, but we need some issues to be changed and handled. And I'm confident that she will do that. As I say, I'm out there advocating on behalf of folks with disabilities, and I will be holding their feet to the fire to ensure that happens. Regarding if Donald is elected, let's put it this way. Even if Donald is not elected, we're already seeing some local election boards saying they will not certify their local elections if Donald does not win.
There are those. I was going to say, Fred, there are those who believe that perhaps in the first presidency, Donald Trump wasn't necessarily wanting to do the job of being president, that he just liked the idea of being elected by the American public as president. But it's going to be a different story if he gets in now. He knows what's involved and what he can and can't do.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up, because I was in the Oval Office many times, and there were several occasions where he was acting like the New York business guy. You know, I want this done. And for lack of a better word, the bureaucrats would come in and say, you can't do that. And he would go nuts when someone would say he couldn't do things. That is why when people, certainly Donald says he has nothing to do with Project 2025, that's nonsense. It's like him saying he had nothing to do with the building of Trump Tower. That will give him the ultimate power he wants, where he can say, I want this done and I want that done. And his minions will take the lead in making sure that happens.
Now, listening to your narrating of the audiobook, which is how I'm following the story, it sounds sometimes like you're trying to be perhaps a little diplomatic in the way you phrase things. Did you have to hold back much?
I like to say, and I have said in the book, that I'm a different kind of Trump. I always was trying to be, you say diplomat, that's a good word. I said I tried to be the Kissinger, even though I didn't necessarily agree with everything Henry Kissinger did, but just trying to bring the family together. And as I said again on another interview, that, I want to go out there and talk to people and let them know that not every Trump has these very dark dystopian views. Let's get out there and start a dialogue and try to bring some civility back. I'm happy to speak with any group there is. I don't even like to use the word group. I'm out there. I want to talk to anybody.
And yet, in some of the early stories that you recount, it seems that what you knew of your Uncle Donald was that there were some good moments too.
Oh, hey, he and I share a passion of golf, and he's the one who got me into playing golf. I remember that clearly. And we played many times over the years and enjoyed all of them, including when he would change his handicap in the middle of the round or have his caddy kick the ball out from under a tree. But I enjoyed those times. I wish, and in the end, getting back to the disability part, he was the most powerful person in the world as president of the United States. It would have been, I'll use the word gracious of him, to reach out to me and say, I know what you and Lisa are going through with William. And I understand, Fred, that you have told me that millions and millions of people in this country are suffering. I'm going to do whatever I can to help you and your cause and get things done. It never happened.
Have you killed that prospect of using that platform of having an uncle as president now that you're essentially voting for the other side?
It would be hypocritical of me not to reach out to him if he is elected, honestly, not to try to do it the second time around.
I was going to ask you, Fred, obviously you've known him from childhood. What would you say are the greatest changes you've observed in your uncle over the years?
He's gotten so much nastier than he ever was. Sure, he had a mean streak, and that was all about him projecting power to get what he wanted, as I've said before. But it's just taken on a very nasty, dangerous tone to it. And if you listen to it all the time, he can't help but demean people, anybody. It makes him feel good. It, as I say, it amps up his base. And it's, I'll use the word again, it's embarrassing, some of the things. I wish he's not going to stop. So if anybody thinks he's going to change, it's not going to happen. So buckle your seatbelts, because it's going to be a very intense 47 or so days left. And I hope the Harris campaign, who I've asked to help in any way I can, they're ready for it, because it's going to come thick and hard.
I have to say, Fred, that your book, All in the Family, is a great kind of scene setter of how the family develops, obviously through your eyes, and how Donald Trump kind of developed his character as well. And is it true that Donald Trump's daughter, Ivanka, was helpful to you in researching the book? And, I mean, have you heard from him or any of his kids, your cousins, since you published?
When I was looking to write this book in the fall, pretty much actually almost a year ago, it's hard to believe, honestly, I reached out to Donnie and Eric and Ivanka with some thoughts I had. And one of the original thoughts, along with doing honoring Dad and William. And by the way, my dad's the anniversary of his passing is coming up on the 26th of September. You know, I had this maybe utopian view of, you know what, our family has become a very polarizing name, not just in the country, but in the world. Why don't we start thinking about your kids, my kids, and future generations of Trump, how we can change things? And to her credit, Ivanka was the only one who got back to me. And I made a pledge to her. I said, I would never use anything that you sent me in a book without letting you know. And when she heard about the book being published, she emailed me. We've never had a very close relationship, unfortunately. I look back at that as kind of a sad part of this. But I said, Ivanka, I told you I would only put stuff in if I had your okay. We wound up not using anything of Ivanka's, her couple of pages that she got back to us. Very thoughtful stuff, and I do appreciate it.
I'm wondering, Fred, have you had a chance to see the new movie, The Apprentice? And I'm wondering what you think movie makers, in the media most commonly get wrong in their understanding of Donald Trump.
Well, I never saw an episode of The Apprentice, so I'm not going to go see the movie. I think what they're going to get wrong is Mark Burnett, who was the brains behind The Apprentice, knew that Donald's career really wasn't as good as Donald thought. I mean, they had to really prep him and advertise him as some great success, even though Donald had bankrupted many of his companies. If you Google Trump brand, it's sort of at the bottom of the barrel. But Mark saw something, and it was a huge success. There's just no doubt about it. But I would think that's one thing people really don't understand is Donald was never really a great real estate or business tycoon.
I think there's research that says now, though, in terms of leaders and characters that are very visible, people seem to want very strong characters, whether they're good or bad. They seem to gravitate towards them.
Yeah, I read some article years ago when I was really grappling how Donald got to where he was in 2015, the populism. And I don't want to play armchair psychologist, but it was basically people like to be lied to. And I think that may be what you've seen over the past number of years. They just, Donald will say, hey, you're great, and the group below you is not great. And I call it trickle-down hatred, if you will, or trickle-down cruelty. And that's what it's all based on, is him demeaning people to make others feel good. And of course, he is the top of the chain.
In Hollywood, it seems everyone loves a happy ending to a family drama. Do you ever really see any hope of reconciliation within the family?
I think the only reconciliation, strange as it may seem, is between Donald and me. I don't think I'll ever have a relationship with my cousins again, which also is a shame. It's interesting, if you want a potential happy ending, many people have said, Fred, you need to turn this book into a movie. So maybe watch out, Riz.
Well, do you ever, has there been a time you ever celebrated together? Have you given each other a Christmas present? Anything like that?
We haven't done that in decades. Christmas, when my grandparents became very old, the family Christmases and Thanksgivings sort of petered out. Now they're all held down in Donald's house in Palm Beach. I have my wonderful family here, Lisa, Andrea, Christopher, and William, and we love celebrating together or, bringing in friends, which is very important to us.
And it sounded like it started with your grandparents actually creating that kind of split with all the kids.
Yeah. Christmas and Thanksgiving were not the most warm and friendly and cuddly times of the year. And it's not even a half joke. It's a joke that one great benefit is nobody wanted to be around each other for more than an hour or so. So it may not have been the most wonderful time, but it was over pretty quick.
As we wrap up, Fred, I want to ask you to reflect on the thought, is the name Trump a blessing or a curse for you?
Oh, it's been a curse. But that being said, if I can use it for good, and I intend to with my wife, Lisa, okay, I'll use the Trump name. That's fine. I'll take the slings and arrows as long as my kids are kept out of it. That's fine with me.
Well, listen, Fred, it was great talking with you. I wish you a good time remembering memories of your father as the anniversary comes up. All the best to you and your family.
Thanks. Same here. Take care. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Bye. Take care. Drama of a different kind now as we turn our attention to ComicCon, known the world over as a massive event for aficionados of the fantasy worlds. It's a place where super fans can meet their superheroes, getting up close and personal with their Hollywood idols. When the event was recently staged in Kazakhstan, I traveled to the capital Astana, where stars including Percy Hines-White of Wednesday fame were busy meeting their fans. Well, among the cast of celebrities was a personal favourite of mine, who's made a name for himself often as a bad guy across a wide range of movies, from Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny and Marvel's Doctor Strange to Star Wars and James Bond. The Danish superstar Mads Mikkelsen. Well, after he'd signed thousands of autographs and posed for countless selfies, we sat down for a chat about his work. We also discussed safety in movie making after the fatal shooting on the set of Rust, and I discovered that, for a bad guy, he wasn't so bad after all. Mads, it's been great to spend some time with you here in Astana at ComicCon. Your first time in Kazakhstan as well.
Yeah, and it was spectacular. I came out of the airport and there was this giant poster for the nomadic games. There's this guy on a horse with a giant bird, I believe it's an eagle, and shooting a bow. And I was like, this is crazy, because my very first film I did in America was King Arthur, and I was on a horse with a bow and a bird.
Going from country to country as you do for events such as ComicCon, how different do you find the fans to be?
Well, they vary from culture to culture, and even in Europe, those countries will also be very different from each other. England is it's middle-aged men who collects James Bond artifacts. Asia, it's for my case, it's a show called Hannibal, where the young girls are identifying with those two characters a lot. So it's all about the culture where you go to, what they're into.
That's ironic, because I asked my daughter Zara which of the roles, because you've been in so many universes,
right?
You know, that I asked her which is the favorite role, and she said Hannibal.
Yes.
It's just strange. And you then said, it's the young girls.
And it's very interesting, because it's two men, and predominantly men issues, but somehow appealing to young girls who's like going through that puberty thing, identity thing, because these two guys are also looking for their real themselves in this.
It's interesting because you, again, are in so many worlds, from Star Wars, Harry Potter, the Fantastic Beasts.
True.
You're in Marvel, the Marvel Universe. You're in Doctor Strange, James Bond, of course, and Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
I don't know anyone else who's crossed over so many.
I don't know. Definitely not any Danish people I know of, but there might be a Brit somewhere, or an American, who's been in all these franchises, but I'm not aware of who that might be.
You know, the thing about it is, how do you find being cast as the villain or the dark character pretty much all the time?
Yeah, I'll take it any day. I mean, back home in Denmark, I get to play all kind of different characters, variety of human beings. And yes, in America, there's a tendency, if you have a funny accent, that they will make you the baddie. But I'll take it.
Knowing you over a couple of days, you just got to be one of the nicest guys. And for the fans here at ComicCon, incredibly gracious. I mean, your hands are covered with ink from signing. Yeah. I mean, it's thousands, actually, of signatures you've done.
There's been a lot of people here, and it's massive. And they're very disciplined. They're standing in line. And if they're disciplined and can stand in line for hours, I can also sit for a few hours. Yeah.
How do you feel about the way cinema has gone? Because you do I'm going to call it the pure stuff in Denmark, where it's about the acting, it's not special effects, big productions, smaller budgets, and it's all about you guys.
Yeah.
How do you find cinemas going when you see it's all about the action stuff for a lot of the world and the Western movie world?
Well, that's true to a degree. I mean, in America, they still make a lot of indie films and solid, good stories. But obviously, what we know America for is Hollywood, and Hollywood tend to be very high budgets, right? And there's a lot of repeat things. You know, you do the franchises, and then the third and the fifth, and so on. And some of it is fantastic, and some is not. But that's always been the case with that machinery over there. I grew up with American films. I didn't watch small French or Polish films when I was a kid. I looked with fascination towards Hollywood, right? And then later on in life, I became in love with some of the independent films and French films, Polish films. But as a kid, it was the big Hollywood thing. So there's a part of a dream coming true that you actually, at my age, get to have a sword in the hand and swing around and fight some giant monsters. It is fantastic fun.
And the weird thing is now AI is having such an impact.
Yeah.
Special effects went to another level.
Yeah.
And they made you...
We don't know where it's going, though. I mean, it's kind of in its infancy right now. But I've already seen stuff online, and that's unbelievable. You can't tell the difference between the real thing or not, right?
You and Harrison Ford both made so much younger for Dial of Destiny,
that's
the
true.
Indiana Jones movie.
Yeah, that was his technique was one thing, I think it was called deep fake.
That's right.
Right, and they already had a little sample of that after a couple of days, and it was just unbelievable. It's just basically him as a young man. They took all the frames that he's ever done as Indiana Jones as a younger person, put them in a computer, and then Harrison, at the age of 80, played the scenes. but they morphed his mimics on it. It was just amazing. In the beginning, they didn't want to do anything with me. They just dyed my hair really black. And I had to tell them, guys, the black hair makes me look really old, so we have to do something.
It's ironic because someone working in news like me, I mean, deep fake has become a major frightening issue.
Oh, it is frightening. Of course it's frightening.
No one knows what to believe or not.
No, that is the scary part. When it comes to news or politicians proclaiming certain things. And there's no shortage of people who would like to use that. So they'll have to find a shape and a form eventually, but it's here to stay. You can't uninvent it, right?
It's online. You're a 1965 baby, so
yes.
The years are catching up. I'm older than you, so I can talk. But it's interesting you're doing these action movies and things. Are you finding? I mean, do you get a lot of preparation time? Are you physically able to keep up with the stuff?
I'm fairly able. As a kid, I was a gymnast.
That's right.
And gymnastics comes in really handy when you do stunts. And I do take pride in doing all my own stunts. I mean, I can not watch if somebody's doing a stunt that I'm not allowed to do. I just hate it. So it's very rare that I don't get to do it unless it's something with a car or something, right? So, but yeah, I can still do all the stuff. The thing is, you always get bruised up or hurt. You always do. And that's fine. But the healing time is a little different now than it was 20 years ago. It just, yeah.
You told a very funny story to me over dinner about you riding for the first time, and it wasn't just even simply riding. You'd mentioned it earlier on. Tell me about it.
Yeah, so they gave me a horse, and I was playing this guy who was an archer. So after like half an hour on the horse, I had no idea what I was doing. They just said, okay, now we go full gallop and let go of the reins. I was like, what do you mean? Just let go of the reins and gallop. So that was the way I learned to ride without the reins, and then shooting this bow thing, and then call upon my bird that would land eventually when I called him. Right?
That was, you're going to say you had the horse, the bird, and the boat.
Yeah, and that was tricky because my bird hated the horse. He was so afraid of it, and my horse was so afraid of the bird. I was constantly going like yo-yo with this one and this one. It was crazy. But I learned a lot from that. So ever since then, I can actually sit on any horse and do pretty fine.
Now, I've seen a few interviews of yours, and you said you don't like method acting. And some people really bury themselves into it. They don't even come out of character, when they leave the set. Yeah. What is it that bothers you?
But I think there's a misunderstanding when I said that. I definitely don't hate method acting. But I think there is a misunderstanding of what that is. Because the whole thing about preparation, you have to learn a certain trade. If you're cutting somebody's hair, you have to learn that in a film. Or you need to be a way to learn something very specific. That's not method acting. This is just preparation. We all do that to a degree. Method acting is a fairly boring technique of being able to repeat certain emotional things. And you will attach it to a physical thing. For instance, like drinking a cup of coffee in a certain way will awaken some specific emotion in you. So it's quite boring, actually. But there is a fascination of people, living on the top of a mountain and for 2 years, and their real life children has to call them a different name. That I find pretentious. But as many other things, people who use that technique, you will find people who are fantastic actors and some who are not. And people who don't use it can be fantastic actor and some are not.
Something that happened not long ago, actually it's an ongoing thing, is what happened in that movie Rust, that Alec Baldwin was shooting.
Oh, right, yes.
And it surprised a lot of people to know there were real guns used as props.
That's a disastrous story, that one. Obviously, I wasn't there. I don't know what went down. We don't even have real rounds in Denmark. You just can't get your hands on them. So that's not an issue in where I come from. But having said that, even blanks are lethal. If you shoot a blank on a certain distance, it's a lethal thing because there's so much coming out of that barrel. So what happened on that film, I don't know. It's crazy when you hear when they break it down. Everything went wrong.
What it made a lot of people wonder is how much preparation is there, how much safety. So how much have you seen in the time you've been in the movies, greater preparation for dangers or potential? I mean, the stunts.
Yeah, it's obviously preparing to Denmark is an infancy of stunts and stuff like that. We don't have an enormous industry, so there's a few people running that. But safety has become more and more important. And it is definitely in England and America. I mean, it's because people are suing each other left and right if something goes wrong, right? But it's always been, since I started, it's always been like I have a responsibility for checking the gun I get. and look at it and show my fellow actors that it's empty or that it's a blank. It's always been the case, so I don't know what went wrong there.
One thing occurred to me just on going back to the cinematic worlds. You actually acted with your older brother, Lars, on the Star Wars movies. How much competition is there between the two of you?
There's always brothers competition, I guess, but I think we're very proud of each other. I'm very proud of what he's achieved in his career, and he's been doing a lot of theater in the beginning, where I kind of leaned towards film. So that was also kind of an icebreaker. We had our own domains, and now he's breaking into mine a lot more, and he's doing really well in films. I'm just very proud of him, and I think it's mutual.
He hasn't had any superpowers or wizardry yet, though, has he?
He's done. I think he did a thing called The Witcher, where he has some superpowers. Right. Yeah. Whether they're bigger than mine in Doctor Strange, I'm not sure about that. And we have to remember one thing: I invented the Death Star.
That's right. Actually, I was going to ask you. You come to Astana. My favorite building here is the Expo Globe, which everyone calls it. Isn't it all identical?
It's fantastic. Yeah, it looks almost identical, and it's beautiful. There's actually a funny story about my brother and the Death Star, because we spent Christmas together a few years ago, and he, as a present, he got the Death Star in Lego, right? A gigantic project, right? And immediately he sat down on the table and started building it. And I was like, I didn't even think about it. And then he was fumbling around, and I realized, hold on, I'm the one who created it. I should give him a hand.
Did you put a bad brick in there so it could all fall apart with the right knowledge? Now, let me ask you, I was interested to hear how you said you'd love to be in a movie with Buster Keaton and Bruce Lee. I was trying to imagine what that movie would be about.
Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't matter. We'll figure something out.
Those are
two iconic characters in this business, and both of them meant a lot to me when I was a kid. Bruce Lee, for obvious reasons, as a young man, you just identified with what he was doing. It was the elegance of and his skills were insane. But he also had that insane charisma, screen presence, that could travel from Asia to America. There was a bridge between those. He had that American side as well. He was very photogenic, and he could tell many things with just his face. And obviously, Buster Keaton was a master of that. They always said he's never smiling, but look carefully. It's a small one, but when he does it, the sky opens. So I've always been fascinated by both of them.
And Bruce Lee in particular was, I knew his story, of the same kind of passion for Kung Fu. He was desperate to get into movies and to break into them in a big way. You actually started quite late. You were about 30 when you first started.
I was 30, yeah. Well, I started late with everything in my life, I think. It's funny, I always seen myself as the youngest in the class, which I was the youngest ever, but it turned out that it's not true. I started late. And I think it was a good thing for me. I was probably a very immature young man. So I think 30 was good for me. If I was 20, or let's put it this way, if I was recognized on the street as a 16-year-old kid, that's a very different thing than being recognized when you're 35. You can handle it in a different way.
One thing that occurred to me in seeing how down-to-earth you are and how accessible and friendly with everyone, I mean, I've never seen you lose it anyway. I was wondering if that's largely because you're such a family man. You had such a solid family.
It maybe, partly. I think it's also a very cultural Danish thing. It's a small country, and we do have a tendency. I think you have something, tall poppy syndrome, is that what you call it?
Yes.
We have this similar thing where it's like, do not think you're anyone. So I think we had that from childhood on, and people are knocking on the head with that always. So I think it's just part of our culture that we don't think we're standing out.
Now, I know it stole a lot of your time. Everyone's been desperate to get a chunk of you while you're here. A couple of things about the future now. I was really pleased, by the way, there's a sequel to Polar, which I really enjoyed.
Yeah, good. Yeah. We're working on it. We'll just have to test a lot of things that has to be going up in the same unit, but it's a working process.
You suffered a lot in that. You even lost an eye. I mean, you can't.
Yeah, but also in real life, I think that's the one film I hurt myself most on. I was in all the stunts. It was unbelievable, constant that something went wrong. And I did my stunts.
And then final thing was I know you're proud of the fact you're in Mufasa.
Yes,
that's coming out.
Yeah, that's going to be super. I haven't seen the entirety yet. I can't wait.
And you're still the bad guy in that?
I'm kind of the bad guy. I'm misunderstood guy. Lion.
Yeah.
It's an upgrade. I'm a lion this time, right? It's a very beautiful story, and we get to see how Mufasa became Mufasa and how Scar became Scar. And I think there will be a few surprises in there on that.
I'm looking forward to that. Mads, thanks for giving me the time. Great to speak with you. Hope to see you again soon.
Likewise.
Take care.
Thank you.
I'll leave you with news of a sequel we can confirm. The Riz Khan Show. We'll be back for another episode next week. From me and the team, thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.
Welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers. Every weekday on Arabiya News. I'm Rosanna Lockwood, coming up on the show. Officials in Lebanon say at least 800 people have been killed by Israeli strikes since Monday. I'm joined by the Palestinian Minister for Foreign Affairs for her reaction. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says his country has been forced to defend itself but is winning in his address to the UN General Assembly. And Netanyahu saying Israel will not rest until its residents can return to the north of the country as fighting between the Israeli military and Hezbollah continues. Welcome. Well, almost 12 months into the Gaza conflict that erupted after Hamas's surprise attack in southern Israel on October 7th, Israel has now engaged in simultaneous battles on two fronts. But plenty of doubt that their expectation of a swift or decisive victory against Hamas and Hezbollah is possible. Amid US-led international calls for ceasefires with Hezbollah and potential hostage for prisoner exchange in Gaza, but little progress, the ongoing dynamics of the protracted conflicts have created a new reality. Today, in an address to the UN General Assembly, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying his country has been forced to defend itself, but is winning. Lebanese officials saying some 800 people have likely been killed and more than 1,500 injured since Israel launched a wave of attacks this week, with at least 25 people killed by Israeli strikes in Lebanon today. In Gaza, the latest figures show more than 41,500 Palestinians have been killed, with 96,000 injured since October last year. Well, for reaction to the situation in Lebanon and the ongoing war on Gaza, I'm joined by the Palestinian Minister for Foreign Affairs, Dr. Wissam Akhabekian. Thank you very much for making time, Doctor. And do you feel somewhat, given the situation in Lebanon this week and all the attention being there, that all eyes are off Gaza for the moment?
I think Gaza is on everybody's mind. Whatever is happening in Lebanon is atrocities and war crimes against humanity. Again, a continuation of whatever is happening in Gaza. But what is happening right now in Gaza, and it continues to happen, and what we have witnessing for the last year is just so atrocious and brutal that even if we wanted to put it aside, we cannot ignore it.
Talk to us about what is happening in Gaza right now.
Well, the situation in Gaza is, to say the least, is a humanitarian crisis, and it is very catastrophic. We have been witnessing this genocidal war for the last year, with all the suffering that has been burdened by the people. There is an enormity of destruction of unimaginable extent. The killing is just unimaginable. Over 150,000 people killed and injured, lack of basic needs, lack of food, on the verge of famine, if not already under famine, 650,000 students with no schooling for 2 consecutive years now, and God knows when they will be able to return to their normal schooling life. A lack of basic necessities, lack of any kind of rights. Just imagine people living on less than 5 liters of water per day. That's way below the international standard. And the suffering is definitely, it has not been seen before, maybe in World War II and onwards. What we are witnessing today is war, is crimes against humanity that must be stopped immediately. And the world has granted Israel the right to reach its objectives. So today, what we are asking is for this world that granted Israel the right to reach its objectives to revisit and reassess what these objectives are. Because what we are seeing and what we are witnessing on a daily basis is killing and more killing of civilians. This is what we are witnessing on the Gaza Strip.
And you talk about, that suffering, that extreme suffering that has been happening, not only for the last year, for a long, long time now. Some saying, comparing it to genocide. Plenty of people have been saying that over the past year. How does it then feel to see that international communities, multilateral organizations haven't managed to get anything done yet, that the situation is still unresolved? There is still no ceasefire.
Well, yes, there is still no ceasefire, and we continue to demand for immediate ceasefire, but it is not happening. The international organizations try, and they are doing whatever they are doing. Is it enough? No, it's not enough, and we demand a lot more. But today, what is happening in Gaza and the restraints on the work on international organizations is increasing by the day. And this is why we are asking for interventions by the international community to ensure that we have unimpeded interventions in the Gaza Strip and an immediate cessation of fire and an end of this war.
Look, the UN General Assembly is ongoing this week in New York while we're talking. The whole world basically gathered. Benjamin Netanyahu speaking today as well, Israel's Prime Minister. How does it feel watching everyone there discuss Gaza without having any progress made so far?
Yes, and this is what President Abbas yesterday tried to send a message on. He described the dire situation on the Gaza Strip and also described the threatening situation on the West Bank. And he reiterated his ongoing calls for immediate stopping of the war and the unimpeded humanitarian assistance. He called the international community to shoulder its responsibilities. He mentioned the hundreds of uncomplied with UN resolutions. He asked that the international community holds Israel to account and requested that Israel complies with international law and the UN Charter. And most importantly, he asked the international community to ensure that they follow up on the ICJ ruling and ensure its implementation, bringing us to a stage where we end this occupation once forever with a sustainable peace onwards. And he presented to the world, to the international community, a roadmap of what he thinks should happen for us to be able to move on.
And there has been some progress elsewhere as well. A proposal put forward this time by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Saudi Arabia, Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud. He's talking about this global alliance. It's been announced Friday that it's going to push for a two-state solution for Israel. How welcome is that news?
I think that is very much welcomed. This was iterated previously. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And today we have seen Saudi Arabia's Prince Faisal bin Farhan, the foreign minister, in a press conference talking about the world coalition on materializing the state of Palestine. And he very specifically said one state has been established. And today the second state, which is Palestine, is overdue. And this is what we will be rallying behind and having an international coalition to work on that that materialization and having a conference held on that matter. So it's very much welcomed.
And as you mentioned there, this comes after comments last week by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman that Saudi Arabia will not establish diplomatic relations with Israel, as had been previously planned, until there is the establishment of the Palestinian state. And in terms of the sort of conditions that have been put down in order for that to happen, do you think it's possible? Do you think it will be achieved?
I think anything is achievable if we resort to reason. And reason says that if Israel wants to live as a normal state and normalize with the neighbors in the area, it needs to act as a normal state. And to act as a normal state, it needs to end its occupation and live side by side in peace and security with its neighbor, the state of Palestine. So all of this is in line with what is needed for a future outlook on what peace looks like in the Middle East.
Returning to the situation back home for you in terms of what's happening in Gaza, but elsewhere as well, the West Bank. Often a lot of criticism that there isn't enough reporting about what's happening in the West Bank. What do you know about the latest there?
Yes, the West Bank, also the situation is very volatile. We have unleashed settlers who are supported by ministers in the coalition government who are settlers themselves. So they do whatever they want on the West Bank. We see them on the streets. We see them burning trees, burning farms, and so forth. And this is a daily happening. We see the Israeli occupation forces invading Palestinian areas, even areas A that are totally under control of the Palestinian Authority. They invade villages, towns, Palestinian camps. There is further land confiscation for the expansion of illegal Israeli settlements. There is piracy of Palestinian tax money by withholding that money and not transferring it to the Palestinian Authority on a monthly basis. There's collective punishment of people. There are Judaization efforts that are intensifying in Jerusalem, attacks and intrusion into the Al-Aqsa compound on a daily basis. There's restrictions on all types of human rights in all facets of life for Palestinians. And if you talk about detentions, we have over 10,000 Palestinians who have been detained in Israeli prisons and already sit in Israeli detention camps today. So the situation is as threatening as it is in the Gaza Strip, but in a different form.
In terms of hopes for a ceasefire, particularly regarding the Gaza Strip, any prospect so far seems to have stalled, seems to have been held up. There doesn't seem to be much will, and depends on who you listen to as to who's holding that up. Where are you at in terms of the moment and hopes for a ceasefire?
Well, we continue to demand an immediate ceasefire because this war, this genocidal war, cannot continue. We cannot continue to see our people being killed and slaughtered on a daily basis. We continue demanding and we remain hopeful. We have to remain hopeful and we have to work more with our allies who are able to influence the Israeli side, because it is the Israeli side who every time we come close to reaching a ceasefire, something happens and we have new Israeli conditions. And for many, the belief is that only an imposed ceasefire will work at this stage.
Do you have any hope of ceasefire with Benjamin Netanyahu helming Israel?
I will be shockingly surprised if it happens with Netanyahu. But Netanyahu or anyone else in the Israeli government or now or any new coming government, if at all, what needs to be done is go to reason and think strategically, and enough is enough for Palestinians and most probably for Israelis.
Do you think there is enough domestic pressure internally on Netanyahu from the public, from the voting Israelis, for there to be a change in his approach?
I think there's a lot of pressure. We've seen it mounting throughout the last 11 months, but it obviously has not reached the stage where it should influence the decision-making of this coalition rightist government.
In terms of ceasefires, when we talk about them, we can almost get confused because there's war happening almost on two fronts at the moment from Israel, not only towards Hamas in Gaza, but also Hezbollah across the northern border into Lebanon. Also discussions at the moment of dashed ceasefire hopes for that border between Israel and Lebanon. Do you think, though, if it was achieved, a ceasefire with Hezbollah, that would actually ease the issue that's happening in Gaza, and that you'd find a kind of a coalition of ceasefires, if you like, something that would unlock better relations elsewhere?
I think what is happening on the Lebanese front is as important and as difficult as what is happening on the Palestinian Gaza front. I think a ceasefire has to go across the line, whether it's in Gaza or in Lebanon. Any escalation on either side will help erupt the other side and even escalate the situation even further than Gaza and Lebanon. So what we need to see is a complete ceasefire on all fronts.
Do you think Israel could ever be made to pay compensation to help rebuild Gaza in a future world?
Israel did a lot of destruction in Gaza, and compensation is warranted. Israel has been asking for compensation from Arab countries, from Germany, from other places for what was perpetrated and inflicted upon Jews all over the world. And I think what Israel has done needs to be accounted for, and Israel should be held responsible, and compensation is part of it.
And other lines that we've been getting out of the UN General Assembly this week, European Council President Charles Michel saying that the continued denial of state for Palestine threatens the security not only of Palestinians but of Jewish people as well. What do you say to that?
That's very true, because Israel cannot enjoy and be prosperous if its neighbor is occupied and in pain, and its people killed and the rights violated on a daily basis. If Israel wants to live in peace and security, its neighbors have to also enjoy that peace and security. And that will only happen if the Palestinians are able to exercise their self-determination and to materialize their state and empower the state that is already on only 22% of historic Palestine.
How do you think the Palestinian Authority plays into the role of a two-state solution? Does it?
Well, the Palestinian Authority is the key player. The PLO is the one responsible for the policy and whatever happens on the political level in terms of the state of Palestine. And the Palestinian Authority is the operational arm of the PLO. So whatever transpires now and in the future will be part and parcel of what the Palestinian Authority will be doing here and in Gaza as one unified entity.
In terms of what's been happening in Lebanon this week, it's reignited a lot of discussion about Iran-backed proxies operating throughout the Middle East and the disruption, the violence that's caused by them, and indeed the threat towards Israel. That has also reignited discussion, of course, about Hamas. So would you accept that Hamas is a problem within Gaza that needs to be dealt with?
I think the problem is the occupation. The occupation is the root cause of the problem. If there was no occupation, all the consequences and the results that have developed because of that occupation will be dissolved. So let's focus on the occupation and the Israeli measures, and then we can deal with the rest of the issues that also affect the situation today.
Are you concerned about the upcoming anniversary of the 7th of October, of course, which kicked off the recent wave of atrocities and the situation in Gaza we've been watching over the past year?
The 7th of October is a very, very dark day, and whatever ensued after the 7th of October will remain in our memory and the world's memory for a very long time. I think, I hope, and I pray, and I demand that by 7th of October, we see something different, something that gives us hope that there's a better future for our children and something that they can look forward to rather than looking back to a year of suffering and pain and loss and needs for people to just rehabilitate and live a normal life. This will take a long time, but October 7th will remain with us for a very long time.
In terms of that hope heading forwards and what could change in the world in the coming months, of course, there's a US presidential election coming up. It feels very far away. The news is not focusing on that at the moment, given the situation in the Middle East. But of course, who ends up in the White House could have a very big impact on what happens in the Middle East. Who would be better for Palestinian people? Do you think Donald Trump or Kamala Harris?
I really can't say. I'm not in a position to judge, really. But I think whoever comes to become the president of the United States, it is long overdue that the United States looks at the region in a much more balanced way and takes into consideration today's coalition of the Arab world, the international community, the EU, Norway, and thinks of a better future for the area, a better future where Israel and Palestine can live and prosper together. The situation as is cannot continue, and the ICJ ruling did a lot of justice to the Palestinian people, and this should be seriously considered by the United States, just like it is considered today by most of the states of the world.
Do you feel that at least some of the American public are on the side of the Palestinian people?
Yes, there has been a lot of move in terms of support to the plight of the Palestinians. We see it in universities. We see it in several organizations. We even see it amongst the American Jewish population, especially amongst the younger people. I think what has happened or whatever is happening right now in Gaza and in the occupied Palestinian territories, the West Bank and East Jerusalem, has a lot of influence of how people are viewing the situation today as compared to how it was in the past.
And yet, at the same time, Israel saying yesterday that they've received more than $8 billion in military aid from the US on the same day that the US announced it was sending around the same amount to Ukraine as well. How does it feel to hear news of that?
Well, it's not good news because the United States continues to boast about human rights and the right of all people and on the standards by which they need to deal with the people around the globe. On one hand, they tell us we are for the stopping of the war and we provide humanitarian assistance. And on the other hand, they supply Israel with weapons and ammunition. It doesn't work. And this fails humanity. If you want to have peace in the area, you need to refrain from sending Israel more arms that will kill Palestinians and the other neighbors as well.
What are your concerns from here about the possible escalation of violence and tension in the wider Middle East? From what we've been seeing in Lebanon this week, also we saw claimed attacks from Houthis into Israel today as well. So it does certainly feel like even more players are becoming further involved in what's happening directly with Israel and its foes. How concerned are you in the coming weeks?
Well, we are very concerned because any escalation will further exacerbate the situation, and it's not in the best interest of anyone in the region, Israel, Palestinians, and the region at large.
When Iran says that Hezbollah is acting in the interests and the defense of Hamas and Palestinians in Gaza, what do you say to that?
I say Hezbollah is also defending its own, the Lebanese borders and its own people. Now, who is working with Iran, who is not working with Iran, that's besides the issue. The issue is Israel's expansionist ideology, where that is touching everybody around Israel.
What do you think perceptions are internationally of Israel now, given the events of the last year?
I think Israel has lost a lot of its supporters around the globe. And if you just look at the statements the world leaders have presented at the UN gathering in the last 2 days, you would realize how the states, the various states are perceiving Israel. And for Israel to continue, it needs to do a lot of soul searching and a lot of rethinking of what it has been doing in the past. Israel cannot continue as a state above the law. Israel cannot continue to occupy another people and suffocate their lives on a daily basis. And Israel cannot continue to prosper if it wants to live in peace and dignity. And at the same time, it's violating the rights of the people around it and having this expansionist ideology of displacing people, occupying land, and creating a land of its own while ruling others in a form of apartheid.
And I appreciate this is a difficult question to ask given the state of affairs currently for the Palestinian people. But if you could achieve the aims of getting, a ceasefire and a two-state solution and, two states coexisting against one another and with one another, could you imagine a peaceful and dignified state of affairs for both Israel and Palestine?
Of course. Of course, if there are rules of engagement and there are friendly relations between the two states and there is mutual respect and dignified presence for both states, why not? And we've been saying this since we have opened our arms on negotiating with Israel and reaching an agreement with Israel. The intention was at one point to reach a Palestinian state living side by side with its neighbor Israel in peace and security. Everything is manageable if there is a genuine outlook on what peace is, what the parameters of this peace are, and what the needs of both people are, not one people on the account of the other.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deep fake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
my campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on the Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Now, children have, of course, been among the casualties in the two conflicts, with more than 11,000 minors killed in Gaza since Israel launched its war on Hamas. For reaction to the situation on the ground in Lebanon, where, of course, conflict has been happening this week, I'm joined from Beirut now by UNICEF's Deputy Representative there in Lebanon, Etty Higgins. Etty, thank you for making time on what must be a very busy moment for you. What has the situation been like there in Lebanon this week?
This week has been probably the most difficult week for Lebanon and for Lebanon's children in the past 18 years. We've seen an unprecedented increase in the number of deaths, just with 50 children dying on Monday alone, being killed, along with almost 700 people who in total were killed this week. And the death number is rising every day, sadly, due to the continuing bombardments across the country. We've seen the bombardments escalate throughout the south of the country and in other parts also. And this has meant that hundreds of thousands of people have fled their homes in panic. Currently, we think that there are more than 200,000 that have fled, 100,000 this week alone, but this is probably an underestimate. Today in Beirut, we have teams on the ground who are working to try to find shelter and meet the urgent life-saving needs of many of these families, mainly women and children who have fled. Currently, we have over 500 shelters. Many of them are converted schools that are now hosting over 70,000 internally displaced people. And many of them, unfortunately, fled with just the clothes on their backs and are in dire need of water, of food, of clothing, blankets, mattresses, absolutely everything. So we're working around the clock every day and every evening to distribute hot meals and the urgent supplies and hygiene kits and medication that they require.
So many things you've said there have made me consider the challenges that, of course, the Lebanese people are facing, but you as an organisation trying to provide assistance in a time like this. How prepared were you for this, or were you somewhat taken by surprise?
Well, we had done our preparedness plans and our contingency plans over the past number of months as the tensions continued to escalate at the border. And we had pre-positioned supplies as much as our resources would allow, and we had put them in different parts of the country, along with essential fuel supplies and just the very basics to help children to survive. However, really, no matter how much planning you do, if there is 100,000 people that are displaced in 72 hours, it challenges even the most robust of humanitarian systems and even the most robust of countries to be able to prepare for that level of disaster. We saw traffic choking the main arteries, main roads in Lebanon. Some of the families I spoke to yesterday were in traffic and trying to reach safety for anywhere between 18 to 24 hours. And they said that in itself was very, very traumatic, not knowing if they would reach to safety, given the bombardments of some roads and key infrastructure in the country. So it's definitely a very, very challenging operating environment. And given that there has been a number of crises in Lebanon over the past 4 years, this is really combining. This really means that we're moving from a crisis, a humanitarian crisis situation in the country, to a catastrophe, and one that we were really, really under-resourced and absolutely not funded for at all for a scale of the crisis on this of this magnitude.
What type of support do you need, both from the United Nations but internationally? Because, of course, countries do send aid in situations like this. What would you invite?
Well, our funding appeal is currently less than 20% funded, and we have distributed almost all of the supplies that we had pre-positioned this week. In addition, Lebanon has a long-standing issue with electricity supply, so UNICEF has stepped in to provide urgent fuel supplies to keep water pumping stations going. So really, at this stage, what we need, of course, is funding for the humanitarian response, but most importantly is that we need political commitment to find a peaceful solution for this protracted crisis where we're seeing children suffer enormously. And it's not just the children of Lebanon, but it's also over 1 million Syrian refugees that are being hosted in the country now for over a decade, plus hundreds of thousands of Palestinian refugees who have been hosted by Lebanon also for many decades. And they are all in need of assistance. Even prior to this crisis, 98% of Syrian refugees in the country have been living in extreme poverty. So you can see why it is really a catastrophic situation that will have further consequences beyond the borders of Lebanon should a political solution not be found for this growing catastrophe for the country.
I want to come back to the political efforts for ceasefire, for peace, what's currently happening in New York at the UN General Assembly, the voices we heard. But first, let's personify some of these displaced people. Not saying that you haven't already, but just for the viewers, because I think often there's a danger people just hear, hundreds of thousands displaced and people start to not see humans anymore. They just see an issue. What does a displaced person in Lebanon face? What type of profile are we talking about here? What have you seen?
The shelters that I visited yesterday, I met some really amazing children and young women. One of the boys that I met, he was actually just arriving to the shelter in a very battered car that he arrived in with his family. And he was carrying his school bag, which was stuffed full of his favorite clothes. He said, I just took whatever I could grab to keep me warm at night because I know where I'm going to is colder. And he was terrified. He told me he just wanted to go to school as they had planned. And I spoke to another young lady who was 17 or 18, and she had just finished her first year of studying biochemistry and was looking forward to going back to college and to study to be a scientist. And now she was displaced in a school in Beirut. And she told me about her hopes and dreams for the future, how she was really worried and very, 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 very sad and traumatized from the week, saying that she felt that her dreams for the future were shattered and how could we help her to get back to her education. I spoke to another older gentleman who said that he had left his medication behind and was looking for help to find the medication that he needed to manage his medical conditions, which the whole family were trying to source medication for him. So these are the kind of families. They said that they never wanted to leave their village in the south, and that they had left at the very last moment, hoping that peace would actually prevail. So really some very heartbreaking stories. We also met a lot of children who evacuated at the end, at the very late stages, who had disabilities. One little girl who only had one leg, for example, and explaining how difficult it was for her to get up the stairs in the school that was now acting as her home, and that at home it was much easier for her to move around. So some very, very vulnerable cases that we spoke to yesterday, that we are doing our utmost to support them.
I mean, truly horrifying stories and so much to deal with. And I know you're all trained professionals, but how do you stay motivated, alert, do what needs to be done in that situation, especially given that, representatives from other UN departments and agencies have been killed in strikes in the past few days?
Indeed, we had two UNHCR colleagues who were tragically killed this week. And our condolences to their families and to the UNHCR family. We are doing our utmost to make sure that our staff are safe and secure. Of course, it is a very, very difficult operating environment, and we're taking as much mitigation measures as possible. But as UNICEF, we have been here for decades, and we will continue to stay and to deliver and to do our very best for children here at this time. We work, and I think what motivates us is that we work with some very, very dedicated Lebanese staff and colleagues and frontline workers and non-governmental organizations, civil society, and indeed government officials who go above and beyond every day to deliver the services for some of the most vulnerable people that I mentioned. And we know that, of course, Lebanon is extremely resilient, but at the same time needs to be urgently supported at this very difficult time in its history.
And just finally, Etty, you talked there previously about hopes for a political solution that will bring ceasefire, that will bring peace and stability to the region, given that the UN General Assembly is happening this week. From the statements we've heard out there, how hopeful are you?
Well, it is a unique opportunity at the UN General Assembly this week, and we hope that this is the responsibility, and it's incumbent upon all political leaders that are gathered in New York this week to do their very best to make sure, number one, that international humanitarian law is upheld and respected in Lebanon and in the region, and that everyone works overtime to try to find a political solution for this long-running conflict in the country. And it is really, really long overdue, and it's incumbent upon them to do their very best to find that solution, because there is no military solution.
UNICEF's Deputy Representative in Lebanon, Etty Higgins, will let you get back to your work. Thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, for more, I'm joined now by the former Israeli Deputy National Security Advisor, Professor Chuck David Freilich, and thank you very much for making time. And if you wouldn't mind, let's start with Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, speaking at the UN General Assembly in New York today. Much anticipated comments, his statements. And he actually opened by saying that he wasn't planning at being at what's known as UNGA this year because, of course, he says his country is at war. Israel's fighting for its life. And he wants Israel to seek peace, and he wants to set the record straight by speaking there in New York. What was your reaction to his comments there?
Well, as far as it goes, I mean, I think that's true. Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th, an unexpected total surprise attack, and caused the worst day in Israel's history. Conquering Israeli territory briefly and massacring many, many people. And we've then had a year of warfare with Hezbollah on the northern front. And of course, there are various militias in the region, the Houthis and others who've been firing, and Iran itself. So this is viewed in Israel as an existential war. And most people support it quite strongly. There's broad public support for the war. There are also questions, to be frank, about what the Prime Minister's personal motivations are here, but that's aside from the fact that people do support the war effort.
When you talk about his personal motivations, you're talking politically there, his sort of domestic popularity and hold on power in Israel?
Absolutely. He seems to be willing to go to great lengths to do that. But sometimes one can have two parallel explanations that are both true. The one overwhelming one is the strategic argument, and I think it's a very, very strong one. And the other argument is that he's also doing this for his own, for reasons of his own political survival.
Let's talk about October 7th, because the anniversary of that date is coming up in just over a week's time. Do you have concerns about the upcoming anniversary, given the state of tensions in the region?
Well, I have various concerns. First of all, this is the longest war by far in Israel's history, at least since the War of Independence. And Israel is not built in terms of its society. It's not built militarily for protracted wars. So this is really a contravention of the fundamental principles of Israeli national security thinking. The IDF is stressed. I'm worried, of course, that there is ongoing warfare in Gaza even after a year. Israel achieved the objective of destroying Hamas as a coherent military force, not in killing every last Hamas fighter. That was never a realistic objective, but Hamas no longer exists as a coherent force capable of doing much damage to Israel. On the other hand, it's still in control politically, and Israel has not yet proposed an alternative government and isn't willing to try and bring the PA back in, the Palestinian Authority, which I believe would be the only realistic alternative for all of its limitations. And then we've got the fact that now there's a major confrontation going on in the north. First of all, it's gone very well for Israel so far, dealt Hezbollah a really severe blow. And there may be room and a need for another few days of warfare before we try and reach a ceasefire. But in the end, all military operations, all wars end in some sort of diplomatic resolution. And the question is whether we can bring that about and do so relatively quickly in the northern front. That requires that Hezbollah agree to a ceasefire and agree to separate that ceasefire from what's happening in Gaza. If that happens, it will be a significant achievement. And I could talk about this at length, so just one final sentence. One of the things that I'm deeply concerned about is that the year of warfare has diverted international attention from what is the really big story, and that is Iran's progress towards a nuclear capability.
There's so much, and I would encourage you to speak at length, actually, because there's so much we want to ask you about. Let's talk then Iran, and we'll go back from there, and I'll pick up on your other points. But everybody I've spoken to this week for this show, stateside, has pointed out the importance of discussing Iran and not dislocating them from this conversation. What's happened with regard to nuclear capability, but of course the way they are backing proxies throughout the Middle East. We've even seen activity from the Houthis towards Israel today, the Houthis claiming that. Why has this flared up so much in the last year? Why have Iranian proxies felt so emboldened to act in the past year, do you think?
Well, first of all, October 7th was Hamas actually plagiarizing, if you will, the Iranian Hezbollah plan for the Northern Front. In other words, we know that Hezbollah was planning something very, very similar, a major rocket attack as cover for ground forces swarming across the border. In the case of Hezbollah, it was the Radwan, not the Nukhba, but people coming out of tunnels. It was the same basic idea. And Hamas, who's actually the junior partner by far, came and did it, and they did it far more effectively than anybody was, I think, dreaming of. So on the one hand, it was plagiarizing. On the other hand, it was considered a remarkable success. Iran and the axis of resistance, their allies, their proxies in the region, have long had a decades-long plan in their minds, I think a real strategy designed to bring about Israel's ultimate collapse. And because these are fundamentalist organizations, they know it can take some decades. But the idea is repeated limited wars, each of which weaken Israel and undermine its international standing and its societal resilience. And the objective over a few decades is to bring about the collapse. And I think they viewed October 7th as a dramatic step towards that end. On the other hand, to Hamas's great dismay, neither Iran or Hezbollah got directly involved in the fighting in a major way. Hezbollah did. It's been low to mid-level fighting, but not all out. And Iran has refrained from getting directly involved. And yes, the Houthis and the others did sporadically. The bottom line is that I think that the axis, at least until the last few days, until Hezbollah got hit as hard as it has, they were feeling quite good. They were feeling that this was, as I was saying, a major step towards the long-term objective, but also that they had found a military response to Israel's heretofore unquestioned military superiority. So they were feeling quite good about things, and the hit to Israel's international position. I think maybe they're ending the year a little bit less confident than they were just recently.
That's what I was going to ask you, to the extent that you said that Israel has scored some success with regards to its stated aims across the border, the northern border into Lebanon this week, against Hezbollah, taking out quite a lot of the command structure in some quite elaborate ways, some series of aerial bombardments that have targeted Hezbollah commanders. To what extent do you feel like Iran has marked what it's achieved in its own sort of military and geopolitical aims over the last year as a success? Do you think Iran feels successful towards the end of this year?
Well, I mean, if you look at the overall balance sheet, yes, I think they feel quite successful. Their proxies upset the regional balance. They support the Palestinian cause, and October 7th demonstrated that Israel can't just ignore the Palestinian issue and go ahead with regional normalization without regard to that. They believe that they achieved the strategic parity that I was mentioning before, and that it's a big step towards the long-term objective. And at the same time, they saw, for example, on April 13th, the one time that they got directly involved and fired about 360 missiles and drones at Israel, that an international coalition led by the United States and reportedly including a number of Arab and Gulf states and a number of European states, this international coalition neutralized the attack almost completely. Just out of 360, 3 or 4 got through and caused almost zero damage. So I think it demonstrated to them once again, first of all, American primacy in the region, but also that yes, they did succeed, and I should have mentioned this, they succeeded in postponing regional normalization, of its Israeli-Saudi normalization and maybe beyond, but cooperation is continuing nevertheless on the military level, and I think that was an important wake-up call for them. And now the hit to Hezbollah is a further one. So I think, like many things in life, at the end of the year, it's a mixed assessment.
And in terms of the balance sheet, returning to Israel, and it's Netanyahu's stated war goals and aims for Israel with its military action, not only across the border, not only across into Gaza with Hamas, but Hezbollah in the north. I mean, in terms of what's happened in Gaza, the war goals have not been achieved in terms of all the hostages being returned home, which, of course, Netanyahu is still facing a great deal of pressure for back home. Also, a swift resolution to things and limited military action was not achieved. And, of course, mass civilian deaths and injuries and casualties across Gaza. How much do you think they will be able to swiftly achieve goals across the border in Lebanon with all that in mind?
Well, I think in Lebanon, the objectives may be different. And I hope that the pressures from the far right, from Ben-Gvir, from Smotrich, will not interfere too much with how Israel prosecutes this war. It's already having some effect. But I think the objective here is to force a relatively quick ceasefire and put pressure on Hezbollah to allow American and French diplomacy to go ahead. But in the south, in Gaza, you have to differentiate. In terms of the purely military objectives, Israel was extremely successful. Okay? Hamas is no longer a threat of significance to Israel. Yes, it can conduct some guerrilla attacks against Israeli forces. There are hardly any in Gaza today. The numbers are tiny. Yes, it can still fire the occasional rocket, but it's really not significant. And most of the Gaza area population has gone back to their homes. I think people don't really understand that the war, quote unquote, the war in Gaza ended by January. And what we've had since then were two major operations, one in Rafah and the other in Khan Yunis. But with those two exceptions, it's been low-level fighting and the last very low fighting throughout. And yes, many civilians were killed. Almost half of them, almost half were actually Hamas fighters. The official PA numbers do not differentiate, or the Gaza Ministry of Health numbers don't differentiate. And I would ask the question, I mean, who's really responsible for the civilian deaths? Is it Israel, which is fighting a war of defense, or is it the people who intentionally place their rockets and other capabilities close to within the civilian population and close to the most sensitive kind of target, whether it's hospitals and schools and nurseries and all sorts of things like that. So I'm not going to discount the horror of civilian deaths, but let's put it in proportion.
That is, of course, the line that we often hear from Israeli military sources, which is the fault lies with those who are firing missiles from Hamas or Hezbollah territories or from those homes. But the world has watched on in horror, of course, at the volume of civilian deaths, the casualties, the injuries that have been inflicted by Israeli airstrikes and weapons over the past year in Gaza and now in Lebanon. Elsewhere in the programme, we're speaking to somebody from UNICEF about what children in Lebanon are going through right now. Some in Lebanon talking about psychological warfare, even just the sound of Israeli jets breaking through the sound barrier day after day, having to hide in bomb shelters. How do you contend with that and then the feeling of safety that Israelis have? Day in, day out, people in Gaza, people in Lebanon at the moment, unable to feel safe. Israel, of course, has a right to defend itself, especially after October 7th. Most of the world agrees that. But how do you work out that balance sheet in terms of the horror that's being inflicted on civilians?
Well, first of all, I say it's much less of a horror than is being described. And the talk, certainly for the last half year and almost from the first day of the war, about starvation in Gaza, it's not true. I'm not trying to say that life is great in Gaza. It most certainly is not. But there's no starvation. And in southern Gaza, there's lots of food. And war is cruel. War is the most heinous form of human behavior. But I say again, who is responsible for these deaths? Do you expect Israel, which is being attacked, whether by Hamas or Hezbollah, and nobody denies that? You can say that Israel should be taking more steps to achieve a peace agreement with the Palestinians. Personally, I agree. I also cast doubt whether that's at all feasible, but I think Israel should be trying more, and the settlements I wouldn't do. But the people who are firing and intentionally killing civilians, not as a byproduct, an unfortunate byproduct of military operations, which are actually very careful, are Hezbollah and Hamas. And are you expecting us to attach even greater caution, greater care for human life than our adversary does? Well, as a matter of fact, we do. And the IDF really, I know people don't believe this, maybe particularly in the Arab world and some in the West. The IDF is extraordinarily careful. And the unfortunate civilian death rate compared to other similar military actions is very, very low. If you look at what happened in Iraq, for example, the number killed is much lower. And there are military experts in the world who say that Israel is trying to achieve, or it has achieved, a level of precision, has set a new bar for military action that no other military will be able to achieve. And what other military goes and distributes leaflets and SMS warnings to the enemy, or to the civilian population, but indirectly to the enemy, saying, get out of a certain area because we're going to have to operate there. And last week in Lebanon, telling people in the south and maybe some other areas, move at least, I think they said 100 meters, I forget whatever the figure was, away from where you live, if you know that there are Hezbollah targets right there. And of course they know, because Hezbollah put thousands or tens of thousands of missiles in southern Lebanon in people's homes. Didn't ask them very much for permission. They said, you will have a missile in your home, won't you? And thank you for volunteering. So, I mean, I really, let's put this in proportion again, and let's remember who started this. And I think many of the people who are making these claims in the Arab world and around the world, and many of them are well-meaning, of course, because nobody likes civilian casualties, but many of them are trying to create a situation in which Israel can't really do anything to defend itself. Well, you can't use economic pressures. That's not nice, especially using food privation. Okay, so Israel doesn't do that. You can't use military measures because civilians are killed. Then when supposedly Israel launches the attack against the pagers and the walkie-talkies last week, but a few out of thousands of targets, all of whom were Hezbollah fighters, a few civilians were killed. Well, you can't do that because it causes some collateral damage. Yeah, show me any form of warfare that doesn't cause some collateral damage, and we don't want you to do anything else. In effect, sit there, absorb it for as long as necessary, and for some people until you're collapsed. Sorry, we have a commitment to defend ourselves.
We really appreciate you making time to speak to us today and sharing your perspective and experience. Former Israeli Deputy National Security Advisor, Professor Chuck David Freilich.
Thank you.
Well, for more on Netanyahu's comments at the UN General Assembly, I'm joined from Washington, D.C. by the former country director for Afghanistan in the Office of the Secretary of Defense for Policy and Pentagon official, now at Rand Corporation, Jason H. Campbell. Sir, thank you for making time to speak to us today. And let's start with the UN General Assembly happening stateside and Benjamin Netanyahu's much anticipated comments being delivered at last today, saying that he didn't actually intend to visit New York this year for UNGA, given that his country is at war, and that he said Israel's fighting for its life, but it seeks peace. What did you make of that?
Well, I think it was fairly expected, given Israel's fairly contentious relationship with the United Nations in recent years, and particularly with Prime Minister Netanyahu. I think he felt compelled to come to New York and to, amidst great criticism for Israel among some of the members, provide their take on the situation and some general points of agreement that peace is indeed the ultimate goal. But thus far, from all sides, there has not been a lot of detailed responses in terms of what conditions that peace will be potentially reached under.
In terms of the way that the US is viewing what's currently happening in the Middle East at the moment, and let's take it on two branches first, government and then the public. But let's talk about the government, because there has been analysis this week that the actions that Israel took in Lebanon, this wasn't from us, but it's just various military analysts saying that it may have been timed because it was the end of the Biden presidency. There's only a couple of weeks until the election. The US government can't really do much at the moment. It's just doing the sort of final bits, wrapping up, sending aid, etc. Do you buy that theory? Do you think this was all timed so that the US government didn't really act much at the moment on Israel?
I wouldn't put a lot of stock in that. Perhaps at the margins that may have could have been a factor in some of the thinking. I think, more broadly speaking, what we're seeing here is the complexity involved when you have some sort of conflict begin in this part of the world. How difficult it is to get that conflict to subside in favor of what we're seeing here are these incremental escalations that are certainly being done at a scale that has not been seen in a number of years. So I don't know to what extent I would place the U.S. current political atmosphere in the among the many factors that are currently fostering what's happening in this part of the world.
Understood. But in terms of the way that the US public, as I promised to ask you there, thinking about this, is there as much attention there across the Atlantic on what's happening here, concern about the state of geopolitical tensions here in the Middle East? And will that affect the way people vote?
It's difficult to say. I think that in terms of the international crises currently ongoing, the area of the most stark disparity between candidates right now lies, I think, more in the dynamic in the Russia-Ukraine war. In terms of the current situation in Israel and the broader Middle East, there's absolutely concern. I think you're seeing increased activists, being more vocal and participating in more of the, public displays of frustration. Unfortunately, I wouldn't be very in a good place to comment on the degree to which that's going to impact the U.S. elections.
Well, let's talk to you about your experience then as a former country director for Afghanistan in the Office of the Secretary of Defence and Policy. And the way that you think, do you feel like the US has a role to be getting involved with regards to mediating, not only looking at a ceasefire deal, which of course is what a lot of the world is looking for at the moment in terms of peace here, but do you think there is a US military role required currently in the Middle East?
I think the U.S. absolutely has a broader role in trying to help to bring peace to this region, and is obviously seen by many, and I think accepts the role as a global leader on issues such as these, and particularly in this region. And I think we've seen them be active in recent times, and express periodic frustration. I think with some of the actions that Israel has taken. There's been some public reports of elements of the Biden administration being frustrated at most recently the 21-day ceasefire that was ultimately rejected by Prime Minister Netanyahu. As in terms of whether or not there's a military role, I think the U.S., while it's certainly increasing its presence in the region, is very careful to keep its military away from the immediate area. There was the attempt early on in Gaza to initiate the added flotilla for the provision of aid. that had mixed results. But in terms of the U.S. role here, it remains largely diplomatic, though with the military being prepared should there be a broader escalation of hostilities in the region.
How important a role do you think the US plays then at the negotiating table when it comes to political solutions and ceasefire negotiations?
It has a very influential role, but I think that it's understood too that that role becomes more efficient and effective if working with other allies and partners, as it is now with particularly the UK, France, some other Middle East partners in trying to bring the various sides together and to seek solutions. The difficulty has been, however, that you have other forces on all sides of the conflict that are making it very difficult, as I said earlier, to de-escalate the situation. And instead, we're unfortunately seeing these incremental escalations with little understanding what these various sides would want to eventually see in some sort of a ceasefire and/or eventual peace.
How much sort of faith, how much store do you still have in the power and the ability of global alliances and multilateral organisations like the UN to actually achieve progress in things like ceasefire negotiations?
Well, I think, look, the UN is a very large organization with a couple of hundred members. I think that they need to remain active in trying to bring various sides together when there is a broader conflict. That's going to be more complex and more difficult the more members you have, and it's always going to be a forum for various sides to voice their frustrations. And the UN is again will have to sort of continue to press on and seek that some sort of a level discussion despite some of the various perspectives of its members. What I think has also been working in complement to this is, again, the U.S., other Middle East allies and partners, European allies and partners, those who have influential relationships with the various sides of this conflict to try to really get at what can be done to cease these hostilities.
How concerned are you at the moment, given your expertise, in the state of regional tensions, the way we're seeing missiles being fired from various parts of the Middle East at the moment? I mean, in terms of how hot it is right now, what's your concern?
No, I mean, this is an extreme concern, is that we are collectively, I think, on a razor's edge when it comes to the possibility of a wider ranging conflict that could engulf much more of the Middle East region. We're seeing the Houthis in Yemen. Obviously, Iran has a major role with them and with Hezbollah. We're seeing Israel, increasing its attacks on southern Lebanon and at least preparing for a ground invasion. This is all extremely concerning. And I think, again, what makes it most concerning is that it's difficult to ascertain what conditions, under which the various current warring sides would accept to a ceasefire that could lead to an eventual peace.
What do you make then of Israel's claims earlier in the week that, it's waited around for the diplomatic solution to happen? That didn't seem within reach, so it had to act militarily.
I think that's, it's a little bit difficult to substantiate that, particularly given the most recent, collapse of the 21-day ceasefire that, according to U.S., French, UK senior officials, had been collectively debated and deliberated on and generally accepted. And then, the recent collapse of that due reportedly to some of the far-right elements of Netanyahu's current government threatening to dissolve the government if that was accepted. So you've got many of these forces, and it's certainly not just Israel within Israel, but among all of these groups that are having impacts on their respective sides that do not point towards a near-term peaceful solution. And I think that's a cause for great concern.
And the role that Iran plays in all of this, because we've been discussing Houthis, we've been discussing Hezbollah, the Iranian axis, the proxies. How concerned are you at the moment about the lack of progress in anybody trying to rein in Iran? Because that's something I've been discussing a lot with US guests recently, is the lack of progress that's been made. There used to be a maximum pressure campaign on Iran, but many people I've spoken to have said that seems to have been let up in the US. What do you say to that?
I think, look, that is, reigning in Iran has been a persistent challenge and or frustration for U.S. policymakers going back now for decades. And I think that, I think that's going to continue. I think that it's, again, from a diplomatic perspective, it's going to be a difficult but aspirational task to work with other countries to help rein Iran in. There are other countries in the world that are more supportive of Iran and able to provide them continued access to some of the influence and funding that they're able to provide some of their proxies. And again, it's a very complex issue that has not had a firm, easy solution that I'm aware of.
Former Pentagon official Jason Campbell, we really appreciate your time today. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you for watching, and be sure to join us on Monday for more exclusive interviews. Until then, goodbye.
From the White House to Gaza, Kyiv to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on the Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Auckland. Auckland is known as a city of many lovers, according to its Maori name Tamaki Makura, as those lovers wanted the place so badly that they fought over it for centuries. A geographically blessed city, the New Zealand capital has the appeal of a small town and the style of a modern metropolis. Auckland Museum is one of the country's most recognized heritage locations. The 84-year-old museum houses the most comprehensive collection of Maori and Pacific Islander art in the Southern Hemisphere. On display are graphic textiles, carvings, some of the war canoes, ware or the traditional Maori meeting houses, as well as other 18th and 19th century portraits. Devonport is a self-contained late Victorian neighborhood of historic sites, including North Head, a British fort dating back to 1887. There are also popular cafes and restaurants within it. Find two of Auckland's picture-perfect beaches or climb to the top of Mount Victoria for 360-degree views of the city, Hauraki Gulf, and the North Shore. Waiheke Island is a place for a quick island escape. Worth visiting are the Little Onaroa, Palm Beach, and the mile-long Onetangi. Fancy a dinner nearby with a great view of the beach. A diverse mix of gustatory pleasures, Auckland is also ideal for food trips. The city is a medley of different tastes, offering diverse cuisines from contemporary Japanese dishes to all-American pizzas, to healthy Thai salads and greens. Depending on your mood, you can choose from the elegant dining restaurants, or you might prefer the laid-back alfresco cafes. Shopping also keeps the city abuzz. Specialty stores include rare and vintage finds, from the gardening books and electric furniture, fiesta dinnerware and old photographs, as well as restored goods, such as vintage wooden cutting boards, southern French crockery, and white enamel cookware. There are also classic and one-room boutiques that offer pieces for men and women, with a well-curated collection of shoes and boots to match. You may also find shops featuring own-brand clothes and jewelry for men and women, sold alongside a distinct merchandise mix of non-clothing items that reflect the owner's interests.
In a world driven by constant change, understanding the news has never been more essential.
At Al Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines, bringing you the stories that matter from every corner of the globe.
With trusted journalism and deep insights, we provide you with the context and analysis that help you see the full picture.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
And conversations with those shaping the future.
We deliver the knowledge and perspectives you need.
Al Arabiya News,
where knowledge
meets perspective.
Our journey of the history of Arab manuscripts has taken us to the Far East, China, and the year 105 AD. A Chinese inventor named Cai Lun created a unique way of producing paper. He used worn rags, old ropes, and tree bark to produce paper. This paper would be known as al-Kaghid. The Chinese inventor Cai Lun prepared the first paste used to make paper from woven fabric. He sliced it up and mixed it with water, and then he would press the water out. He also prepared paste for paper out of hemp pulp, bamboo, and mulberry bark. The Japanese also used natural products to make paper. There are many stories about how paper arrived to Arab countries. However, most of them overlap with the possibility that in the summer of 134 Hijri, the Arabs captured some Chinese people in one of their battles in Central Asia and took them to Samarkand. These Chinese individuals knew how to make paper, and they taught the Arabs. Al-Kaghid is an Arabized word for paper. It is said to be a Persian word of origin, and there is a possibility that it is a Chinese word in origin. The manufacturing of Kaghid paper was very meticulous and took several days to finalize. White hemp, which is a fibrous plant, would have its threads and fibers extracted from its bark to manufacture paper. The hemp would be soaked in water, then combed down with a brush until it softens. Lime water is then added, which involves using a white substance prepared by heating limestones in special kilns. It is then left to cool, and have the water drained from it. The water is used to soak the hemp for several nights. The soft fibers are pressed and placed under the sun to dry. At night, the fibers are returned to the lime water once again, and left again till the morning to be pressed once again. This process goes on for 3 or more nights, till the fibers whiten. They would replace the lime water twice a day. After the fibers would dry, they were cut with specialized tools. They were then soaked in fresh water for 7 days. And this water would be changed daily until the lime water residue would wash out. The fibers would be pressed delicately in a mortar and pestle, or moist, until they flatten out, and there were no knots left. The paste would be dissolved in a bit of clean water until it became similar to fine silk. Special wooden molds were made for the paper, depending on the requests of those who ordered them to be made. And it would contain many holes. The mold would be covered in water, and the paste would be placed on the mold. And it would be evened out by hand to have an equal thickness throughout the mold. The mold is inverted onto a wet wooden board, which it would stick to, and it would be left to dry until it would fall off on its own. The wooden board would be sprinkled with water, and once it dried up slightly, the first side of the paper would be coated with a hemp mixture. The first side is placed on a wooden board, and the other side is coated in the same manner. When soaking and starching al-Kaghed paper, they would use rice starch after boiling and cooking it in a clean pot, draining it with a clean cloth, and using it to soak the paper. The more the process was repeated, the more aged and refined the paper would become. To color paper, they would add saffron to the starch solution, pour it into a bowl, and then gently dip the paper into the solution so that it would not crumble. The paper would then be dried on a fine thread in a shady area and flipped several times until it dries. It is finally polished with a glass polisher. This paper would be finally ready to be used. Paper is characterized by being lightweight, small in size, portable, and affordable. These factors made it a mainstay of expressing intellectual findings and thought. It was used in the art of calligraphy, especially in the Islamic East. All of this made al-Kaghed paper a strong competitor to papyrus and parchment. The Abbasid Caliph Harun al-Rashid ordered that people only write on al-Kaghed paper, and that was because leathers were capable of being erased and reused, which made them susceptible to forgery. This is contrary to paper, which would be ruined if someone tried to erase something off of it. If a person tried to scrape or rub off something, then markings would be evident. In addition to its other advantages, paper was widely used in writing manuscripts. Despite the use of parchment attempting to hold on to its relevancy, it became one of the tools of scholars, commoners, students of knowledge, writers, merchants, paper makers, and those of prestige and power. Al-Jahiz said the following about paper: "It is sufficient for a person to carry a little bit of paper with their belongings and provisions due to how lightweight and small it is, unlike leather, which is heavier. If a person wanted to carry enough to last the duration of their travels, it would not suffice to carry a camel's worth." Egyptian publishing house has one of the earliest books to be copied onto paper. It is a manuscript titled The Risala in Fiqh by al-Shafi'i, and it dates back to the beginning of the 3rd century Hijri. The oldest Arab manuscript written on paper, according to the latest data, is the Etiquette of Philosophy by the writer Hunayn bin Ishaq, who passed away in the year 260 Hijri. This manuscript is still preserved in the library of the University of Tehran, and it dates back to 249 Hijri. With the increase in demand for paper, the number of centers that produced it increased, and it was no longer confined to Samarkand or Baghdad. The paper industry reached Transoxiana, the Levant and Damascus, Tiberias, and Tripoli. Samarkand remained a central hub for the production of paper, and they continued to produce the finest and most premium types of paper. This new human invention and the drive Arabs had to produce it led to many forms of paper being developed, including al-Sulaymani, al-Talhi, al-Nuhi, al-Faruni, al-Jafari, and al-Tahri. All of these names were given in relation to the governor of the city in which the paper was made. The development of the paper industry, especially al-Kaghid, and its spread throughout Islamic countries, invigorated the production of written artworks and authorship, and helped it transcend into a new era. It was accompanied by a development in the markets of papermaking, scribes, calligraphy, and calligraphers. All of this changed the course of Arab manuscripts, as they were elevated to a level with increased competition after the diversification and growth of this world that is full of art and intellectual creativity. This made us delve further into exploring the depths of our manuscripts, to stand at the tools of the greats of our history, as they explored, mastered, and created.
From the White House to Gaza, Kyiv to Beijing, elections, economics, and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake, and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.